For most of human history, the body was not protected, not supported, and not made comfortable. It adapted slowly to cold ground, unstable sleep, irregular food, and constant exposure to the natural world. Yet today, even with soft beds, controlled climates, and endless convenience, the body feels more strained, more sensitive, and more easily exhausted. What was once endured without question now creates discomfort, fatigue, and quiet signals of imbalance. This is not a failure of the modern world, but a quiet mismatch between what the body became and what it now receives. Humans lost something important and the body is paying for it. But what exactly was lost? And why does it still matter now? The human body did not begin in a place of comfort, and for a very long time, it did not expect comfort as a condition of rest or survival. It formed slowly within environments that shifted from cold to warm without warning, where the ground was uneven and where no surface was designed to support the shape of the spine or soften the pressure of bones against earth. Early humans did not prepare a place to rest in the way it is understood now. Instead, they adapted their bodies to whatever surface was available, allowing muscles, joints, and connective tissue to absorb and redistribute pressure over time. This adaptation did not happen quickly, and it was never complete, but it shaped a body that could tolerate imperfection rather than avoid it. The ground, in this sense, was not an obstacle. It was part of the body's constant negotiation with the environment. Archaeological traces suggest that early human groups often rested in open landscapes, caves, or temporary shelters, none of which provided consistent support. There is no evidence of long-term structures designed specifically for comfort in sleep during most of human history. This absence is not a gap in the record, but a reflection of how the body functioned within its limits. It did not require softness to recover, and it did not rely on stability to maintain balance. Instead, the body learned to adjust in small, continuous ways, distributing weight differently each time it rested, never fully still, even in sleep. Over time, this created a system that was responsive rather than fixed, capable of handling variation rather than resisting it. In contrast, modern environments often remove this variation almost completely. Surfaces are flat, temperature is controlled, and movement during rest is reduced. The body no longer negotiates with the ground in the same way, and as a result, certain patterns of adaptation are no longer reinforced. This does not mean the body has forgotten them, but it suggests that the conditions that once shaped them are no longer present. When these conditions disappear, the body does not immediately replace them with something new. It continues to operate with structures that were formed under different assumptions. This creates a quiet tension between what the body expects and what it receives. The spine, for example, evolved to handle irregular support, shifting its alignment in response to uneven surfaces. When placed on a consistently soft or rigid surface, that dynamic adjustment becomes less necessary, and over time, the muscles that support it may respond differently. This is not a failure of the body, but a reflection of its history. It carries within it a memory of conditions that are no longer common. That memory is not conscious, and it does not guide behavior directly, but it remains embedded in the way the body distributes pressure, balances itself, and responds to rest. Looking further back, even before structured shelters appeared, early members of the genus Homo erectus moved across varied terrain where rest was temporary and often exposed. Their bodies were shaped by repeated contact with natural surfaces, and their survival depended on flexibility rather than control. This pattern continued for a vast stretch of human existence, long before agriculture or permanent settlements introduced new forms of stability. The shift toward comfort, when it began, was gradual and uneven, and it did not immediately redefine the body's expectations. Even as tools improved and living spaces became more predictable, the underlying structure of the body remained tied to earlier conditions. This creates a situation where the body exists in an environment that no longer reflects the context in which it formed. It does not resist this change in an obvious way, but it does not fully align with it either. The result is not always discomfort in a direct sense, but a subtle difference in how the body experiences rest, pressure, and stillness. These differences are often quiet, difficult to notice, and easy to attribute to other causes. Yet they point toward a deeper mismatch, one that begins not with modern life itself, but with the gradual removal of the conditions that once defined what it meant for a body to rest. If comfort was not the starting point, then the body's sense of rest must have been built on something else, something quieter and less visible than softness or support. Rest, in earlier human environments, did not come from removing pressure but from learning how to exist within it. The surface beneath the body was rarely even and rarely forgiving, yet the body did not remain rigid against it. Small adjustments continued even in sleep. Subtle shifts of weight from one side to another, slight changes in muscle tension, brief awakenings that did not fully reach awareness. These movements were not interruptions, they were part of how rest was maintained. Over time, this created a pattern where stillness was never complete, and recovery was not dependent on a single position held for long periods. Instead, it emerged from variation, from the body's ability to respond continuously to the conditions around it. In archaeological contexts, there is little indication of specialized sleeping equipment during most of human history. Organic materials such as leaves, grasses, or animal skins may have been used, but they did not eliminate the unevenness of the ground. They only softened its edges. The body still received information through pressure, temperature, and texture, and this information shaped how muscles relaxed and how joints settled. This constant exchange between body and environment formed a kind of feedback system, one that did not rely on conscious control. The body adjusted because it had to, and because it could. This capacity for adjustment was not limited to a single generation. It extended across long periods of human existence, reinforcing patterns that became embedded in the structure of muscles and connective tissue. When considering early populations such as Homo sapiens during their earliest migrations, the variability of terrain becomes even more significant. Movement across different landscapes meant that no single resting condition was repeated long enough to become dominant. Each environment introduced new forms of pressure and new demands on the body. Over time, this variability supported a system that remained flexible rather than specialized. In contrast, modern resting environments often aim to reduce variation as much as possible. The surface is designed to be uniform, to support the body in a consistent way night after night. Movement during rest is minimized, sometimes unconsciously discouraged by the stability of the surface itself. The body is placed into a position and allowed to remain there for extended periods. This creates a different kind of stillness, one that is more complete but less responsive. The feedback that once guided small adjustments becomes less pronounced, and the body may rely more on passive support than active adaptation. This shift does not immediately produce discomfort, but it changes the way rest is experienced. Muscles that once engaged in subtle, continuous adjustments may remain inactive for longer periods, and the distribution of pressure may become more fixed. Over time, this can alter how the body interprets stillness, making prolonged immobility feel less natural, even if it appears more comfortable on the surface. The difference is not always obvious, and it is not always negative, but it reflects a change in the relationship between the body and its environment. Rest is no longer a process of ongoing negotiation. It becomes a condition that is externally maintained, yet the body continues to carry within it the patterns formed under earlier conditions, where rest depended on movement, variation, and constant low-level interaction with the ground. This quiet mismatch does not present itself as a single problem. It appears instead as a collection of small differences in how the body settles, how it shifts, and how it responds to stillness over time. The deeper point is not simply that early humans rested on harder surfaces, but that the body itself was shaped inside a world where support was never complete. It is easy to imagine discomfort as a problem that all living bodies try to eliminate, yet much of human history suggests something quieter. The body was not built in a setting where pressure disappeared. It was built in a setting where pressure changed, and where recovery depended on responding to that change rather than escaping it. A sleeping place might be a patch of earth inside a shelter, a bed of plant material laid over uneven ground, or a temporary resting place used only for a short time before movement began again. None of these settings offered perfect alignment, full insulation, or reliable softness. What they offered instead was variation. One night would not feel exactly like the next. One season would not resemble another. This matters because the body does not only respond to extreme hardship, it also responds to repeated patterns. and for most of human existence, the repeated pattern was instability. That instability trained the body to stay adaptable. The spine, hips, shoulders, and even the small muscles that hold posture were not living in a world of fixed positions. They were living in a world where every surface asked a slightly different question. How will you settle here? How will you release weight here? How will you remain safe enough to sleep while never being fully removed from the ground beneath you? When archaeologists look at early habitation sites, they often find evidence of fire, tools, food remains, and traces of temporary or repeated occupation, but not the kind of durable sleeping infrastructure that would suggest a body surrounded by consistent support. That absence helps frame an important truth. Human rest developed before comfort became a material system. It belonged first to environment, posture, fatigue, and timing, not to furniture. Even when later societies created more structured interiors, mats, raised platforms, or layered bedding, these changes arrived very late in the full timeline of the species. The older pattern had already left its mark. The human body had spent an immense span of time learning to recover under conditions that were exposed, changing, and rarely optimized. This is one reason modern stillness can produce a strange kind of unease. The body may be technically more protected than ever before, yet protection is not the same thing as biological familiarity. A body that emerged from long contact with irregular ground may not interpret perfect support in a simple way. It may benefit from it in some respects, yet lose something in the process. The constant conversation between tissue and terrain, between muscle tone and shifting pressure, between small movements and the surface that invited them. Looking back toward the early path of human development, the picture becomes clearer. Before cities, before permanent domestic interiors, before sleep became separated from weather, season, and land, humans belonged to a restless physical world. They were not outside nature when they rested. They remained inside it. Their nights carried traces of the same reality that shaped their days. Uneven ground, fluctuating temperature, limited barriers, and the need for the body to remain responsive even while tired. This does not mean the past was better, gentler, or more natural in a romantic sense. It means only that the body's long history was written under those conditions. When those conditions recede, the body does not instantly become a new thing. It carries forward old expectations into new settings. That is where the quiet cost begins. Not in one dramatic break, but in a slow separation between the world that formed the body and the world that now receives it. To understand what may have been lost, it is necessary to begin here, with the possibility that the body once knew how to rest not because the world was soft, but because it remained in contact with what was real. The ground was never just a surface beneath the body. It was a constant point of contact, a reference that shaped how the body understood weight, balance, and rest. For most of human history, there was no separation between the body and the earth beyond what could be gathered or arranged in a short time. A thin layer of plant material, a piece of hide, or nothing at all often formed the boundary. This meant that every time the body settled, it received direct information from the surface below. Pressure was not evenly distributed, and it was not meant to be. Instead, certain points carried more weight, while others adjusted in response. This unevenness created a pattern of micro-adjustments that continued even in stillness. The body did not collapse into the ground. It responded to it, slowly shifting until tension was balanced enough to allow rest to begin. Over time, this process became familiar, not as a conscious habit, but as a background condition of being alive. The ground in this sense was not passive. It provided resistance, and that resistance shaped the behavior of muscles and joints. Archaeological evidence from early habitation sites shows repeated use of natural surfaces such as compacted soil, rock floors, and shallow depressions formed by earlier occupation. These were not designed spaces. They were places where bodies returned again and again, leaving subtle traces but rarely altering the fundamental nature of the surface. This continuity suggests that the human body did not depend on altering the environment to create comfort. It depended on adjusting itself within what already existed. When early members of the genus Homo sapiens moved across landscapes, they encountered a wide range of ground conditions. Dry earth, damp soil, loose sand, packed clay, stone, Each of these surfaces interacted differently with the body, changing how weight was distributed and how long a position could be maintained before adjustment became necessary. This variability reinforced a system that did not expect uniform support, it expected difference. In modern environments, this relationship is often reversed. The surface is shaped to match the body rather than the body adjusting to the surface. Materials are chosen to reduce pressure points, to create an even distribution of weight, and to minimize the need for movement during rest. At first glance, this appears to solve a problem. Uneven pressure is removed, and the body is allowed to remain still for longer periods without discomfort. Yet this also removes a source of information. When pressure becomes uniform, the signals that once guided small adjustments are reduced. The body may remain still not because it has reached balance through adjustment, but because the surface has eliminated the need to respond. This creates a different kind of rest, one that depends less on the body's internal feedback and more on external design. The shift is subtle, but it changes the role of the ground. It becomes something that supports without asking anything in return. In earlier conditions, the ground was always asking something. It required the body to find its own balance within unevenness. It required attention, even if that attention never rose to the level of awareness. Over long periods of time, this constant interaction may have shaped not only posture, but also the way the nervous system responded to contact. Pressure was not simply endured. It was interpreted, adjusted to, and integrated into the process of resting. When that interaction is reduced, the body may still function, but it does so with fewer signals to guide it. The result is not necessarily pain or immediate discomfort, but a quieter change in how the body settles into stillness. The ground remains present, but its role has been altered. It no longer participates in the same dialogue with the body, and without that dialogue, something small but persistent begins to fade from the experience of rest. The body does not only rest on the ground, it measures itself against it. A firm or uneven surface tells the body where weight has gathered, where joints are turning inward, where muscles are holding more than they need to hold. That information arrives through contact, not through thought. It arrives through pressure on the heel, the side of the hip, the ribs, the shoulder blade, the curve of the neck. In a world where most rest happened close to the earth, this stream of feedback was ordinary. It was part of what allowed the body to keep adjusting without fully waking, part of what made stillness dynamic rather than frozen. A person lying on packed soil, layered grass, or a bed of hides spread over stone would not have received one smooth message from below. The body would have felt slight differences from one point to another, and those differences mattered. They encouraged a turn of the torso, a shift of the knees, a soft change in the angle of the spine. This did not create perfect comfort. It created responsiveness. The body remained in contact with a surface that kept reminding it of gravity, shape, and weight. For most of human existence, this kind of contact was not occasional. It was normal. Before built interiors became dense, padded, and insulated, the body learned its boundaries from a world that pushed back. The ground was one of the oldest forms of resistance the human body knew. It did not support the body evenly, but it did something older than support. It located the body in space. It told the skeleton where it ended and the environment began. It reminded tissue that weight was real and had to be carried, shifted, and released. When early humans moved through changing landscapes and stopped to rest, they were not entering a separate protected zone designed to erase the world. They were remaining inside that world, even at their most tired. The surface beneath them still belonged to weather, terrain, and season. Dry earth in one place behaved differently from damp soil in another. A limestone floor in a cave gave different feedback from a nest of reeds near a lakeshore. These differences were not minor background details. They were part of the physical education of the body across generations. The body did not evolve in a single standardized sleeping condition. It evolved in contact with inconsistency. This helps explain why the modern removal of surface variation may be more significant than it first appears. When a resting surface becomes highly controlled, even, and soft in predictable ways, the body receives less information from below. Pressure is absorbed before it can fully register. Small imbalances are often hidden rather than answered. The body may feel relieved, but it may also become less engaged in the process of settling itself. This is not an argument against comfort. It is a reminder that comfort changes the conversation. The ground once asked the body to participate in rest. Through continuous adjustment, modern surfaces often ask much less. They reduce friction between body and environment, reduce the need for small corrections, and reduce exposure to the plain physical fact of being a heavy living form on a resistant surface. Over time, that reduction may alter how the body experiences stillness. Rest becomes less of a negotiation and more of an arrangement. Yet the body still carries older patterns. Its joints, tissues, and posture systems were not formed in a world of permanent cushioning. They were formed in long contact with surfaces that offered resistance first and relief second. Looking back toward the early beginning of human life, this becomes one of the quiet foundations of the title itself. Something important may not have been a tool, a food, or a shelter alone. It may also have been this direct relationship with the material world beneath the body. Not because the ground was kind, and not because hardship was good, but because the body came from a history in which contact with the earth was constant, informative, and unavoidable. Once that contact is reduced, the body is not simply made more comfortable. It is placed into a different kind of silence, one in which fewer signals rise from below, and one in which an ancient reference point becomes steadily more distant. What matters most is not whether the ground was hard, but whether the body could still read it. A natural surface gave incomplete support, yet it also gave clear information. It showed the body where weight had gathered too heavily, where the shoulder pressed too sharply, where the pelvis leaned unevenly, where the spine had not yet settled into a workable line. In that sense, the ground acted less like a cushion and more like a reference. It did not remove strain, it revealed it. That revelation mattered, because the body is not built only to receive comfort. It is built to respond to signals. For most of human history, those signals came from direct contact with earth. Stone, packed soil, woven plant matter, and other simple materials that still preserved the shape and resistance of the surface below. A resting body on such ground could not fully forget gravity. It remained aware of it through pressure. That awareness did not have to rise into thought. It operated quietly through the nervous system, through muscle tone, through small adjustments of the ribs, knees, neck, and hips. The body shifted because the surface kept telling the truth about where it was. In early campsites and repeated habitation areas, what appears in the archaeological record is often modest. Traces of fire, worked stone, food remains, repeated use of shallow spaces, sometimes evidence for simple bedding materials. What does not appear for the overwhelming stretch of human time is a world engineered to isolate the body from the ground. Even when humans improved their sleeping places with grasses, skins, or raised layers, they still remained close to the material reality of the land. The ground was not erased. It was filtered, but still present. That is an important difference. A filtered signal can still guide the body. A removed signal cannot. This is where the modern change becomes more than a matter of convenience. Once the body is placed on surfaces that absorb, equalize, and soften nearly all pressure differences, its oldest reference point becomes faint. The body still rests, but it rests with less information coming upward. The surface no longer tells it with much clarity where imbalance begins. It no longer asks for small negotiations between bone, muscle, and weight. Instead, it offers a managed stillness, one in which much of the conversation has already been settled in advance by design. That may seem like a simple improvement, but biologically it may also represent a loss of feedback. The body that emerged through long contact with uneven land was accustomed to correcting itself in response to subtle pressure. When that pressure becomes uniformly softened, the body may drift into a more passive relationship with rest. It is supported, but it is also less engaged. This does not mean that all earlier conditions were better, or that discomfort should be idealized. It means only that the body's history includes an intimate relationship with resistant surfaces, and that relationship shaped how rest was organized from below. Looking back toward the long beginning of human life, before permanent houses, before layered interiors, before the separation of sleep from the natural world, the ground was one of the most consistent teachers the body had. It taught balance without language. It taught posture without instruction. It taught weight by refusing to disappear. Through that long exposure, the body developed not an immunity to pressure, but a familiarity with it. It learned how to settle gradually rather than instantly, how to keep adjusting rather than becoming motionless, how to remain in quiet contact with a world that never fully withdrew. When that relationship fades, something subtle changes. The body is still alive, still adaptable, still capable of recovery, but one of its oldest dialogues grows weaker. The loss is easy to overlook because it does not announce itself dramatically. It appears as a gentler but more distant form of rest, one in which the body is protected from the ground, yet also separated from one of the conditions that helped shape its sense of position, weight, and release. To say that humans lost something important may begin here, with the possibility that the body once understood itself through contact with the earth in a way that modern life has slowly taught it to forget. For most of human history, the environment did not remain quiet around the body. It changed in ways that could not be ignored. Light faded and returned without artificial extension. Temperature rose and fell without steady control. Humidity shifted. Wind moved across the skin. And the boundary between inside and outside was never fully sealed. These changes were not separate from the body's internal processes. They were part of how those processes were guided. The body did not rely only on its own internal timing. It relied on constant signals from the world around it. The length of daylight, the gradual cooling of evening air, the difference between dry and damp conditions, all provided information that influenced when the body began to slow down, when it released heat, when it became ready for rest. This connection between environment and body was not precise in a mechanical sense, but it was continuous. It did not require attention. It operated through exposure. When early human groups settled for the night, they did so within a setting that continued to shift. A cave might hold a more stable temperature than open ground, but it still followed broader patterns of the surrounding climate. A temporary shelter could block wind or rain, but it did not isolate the body from the passage of time outside. The environment remained present, even in rest. This meant that the body did not need to generate all of its own signals for sleep and recovery. It received assistance from the natural world. The lowering of temperature could encourage the body to conserve heat and reduce activity. The fading of light could signal the nervous system to prepare for sleep. These were not exact triggers, and they varied across regions and seasons, but they formed a background rhythm that the body could align with over long periods. Archaeological and environmental studies suggest that early human populations lived in close contact with these shifting conditions for tens of thousands of years. During this time, there was no consistent barrier between the body and the external world. Even with the gradual development of clothing, fire, and shelter, the body remained exposed to variation. This exposure did not eliminate discomfort, but it maintained a steady flow of information between environment and organism. Over time, this relationship shaped how the body regulated itself. It learned to respond to gradual changes rather than fixed settings. In contrast, modern environments often aim to remove this variability. Temperature is held within a narrow range, light is extended beyond natural cycles, and humidity is controlled to remain stable. The boundary between inside and outside becomes more complete, and the body is placed into a setting that changes very little across the day and night. This stability can provide comfort and predictability, but it also reduces the number of external signals available to guide internal processes. The body must rely more heavily on its own regulation, without the same level of environmental input. This does not immediately disrupt function, but it changes the balance between internal and external guidance. The body still carries mechanisms that respond to light, temperature, and seasonal variation, but the signals themselves may be weaker or less consistent. This creates a quieter form of mismatch. The body continues to wait for changes that no longer arrive with the same clarity. It prepares for cooling that has already been moderated. It responds to light that does not fade in the same way. Over time, this can alter how the body interprets the passage of time, how it enters rest, and how it moves through cycles of activity and recovery. Looking back toward the long arc of human development, this shift becomes part of a larger pattern. The body was formed in continuous contact with a changing environment, not a controlled one. When that contact is reduced, the body does not immediately adjust its expectations. It continues to operate within patterns that were shaped under different conditions. The loss, in this case, is not a single element that can be easily named. It is the gradual reduction of environmental feedback that once helped guide the body without effort. As those signals fade, the body becomes more isolated within itself, carrying forward systems that were designed to listen to a world that is now quieter than it once was. The fading of environmental feedback does not happen only when nature disappears. It also happens when the body is surrounded by conditions that remain almost unchanged for too long. A room that holds the same temperature through evening and night may feel easier to live in, but ease is not the same thing as information. In older human settings, the body was constantly receiving quiet cues from the world beyond the skin. Air cooling after sunset, the shift from daylight to dusk, the feeling of moisture gathering in the ground, the subtle difference between one season and another. All of these changes helped the body place itself inside time. They did not explain time in an abstract sense. They let the body feel that time was passing. This mattered because the human organism did not evolve in an environment of fixed settings. It evolved in one where change was slow but continuous, and where internal rhythms were reinforced by patterns outside the body. That reinforcement was never perfect, and it was not the same in every landscape. A coastal environment gave different signals from a dry inland plain. A cold open grassland gave different signals from a wooded valley or a cave mouth. Yet across these differences, one principle remained stable. The body stayed exposed to transitions. It did not spend most of its life inside a sealed atmosphere where morning, afternoon, and night had to be learned from clocks or schedules. It felt those differences directly. The first humans were not merely surviving in nature, their physiology was being calibrated by it. The body's changes in alertness, temperature regulation, sleep readiness, and energy use were shaped not just by food or effort, but by the steady arrival of external cues that told the organism where it was in the cycle of the day. Fire may have extended activity, and shelters may have reduced exposure, but neither removed the environment from the body's awareness. Even when protected, people remained connected to darkness, cold, dawn, and seasonal variation in ways that are difficult to recreate inside modern controlled interiors. That long history matters because the body still contains systems that respond to such cues. It still reacts to light entering the eyes, to cooling skin, to changing day length, to the difference between open air and enclosed stillness. These systems were not built for a world in which brightness continues late into the night, temperature changes little across the evening, and daily life is carried out under artificial timing more than natural sequence. Once those environmental cues become faint or delayed, the body does not stop functioning, but it may begin to lose the clear handrail it once used to move from one state to another. Alertness may continue when darkness would once have encouraged slowing. Rest may feel less like a descent and more like a task. The body may wait for transitions that no longer arrive strongly enough to guide it. This is one of the quieter costs of modern stability. A stable environment protects the body from harshness, but it can also deprive it of contrast. Without contrast, rhythms become less anchored. The body may still follow internal cycles, yet those cycles are asked to operate with less help from the world around them. Looking toward the deep beginning of human life, that absence becomes striking. For the overwhelming majority of human time, the organism did not regulate itself in isolation from weather, light, and ambient change. It regulated itself in conversation with them. The environment did not merely surround the body, it participated in its timing. When evening approached, the body was not expected to invent night from within. Night arrived as a full atmospheric condition. When dawn returned, the body did not need a signal chosen by technology to begin again. The world itself changed in ways that reached the skin, the eyes, and the nervous system. To lose part of that contact is not to lose a luxury. It is to lose a layer of biological guidance that had been present for a very long time. The body may still continue, but it continues with a quieter map. Something once provided by air, light, temperature, and the open passage of time must now be recreated imperfectly within controlled space. That may be one reason the body often seems more uncertain than modern comfort would suggest. It is not simply living in a safer world. It is living in a world that no longer speaks to it with the same clarity. What disappears with environmental feedback is not only information about weather or time of day. What disappears is a continuous background conversation that once helped the body know when to tighten, when to release, when to conserve heat, when to become alert, and when to begin letting go of the day. In earlier human life, the environment did not need to be interpreted as a system. It was simply there, surrounding the body with gradual changes that entered through the eyes, the skin, the lungs, and the nervous system. Evening was not just darker than afternoon. It was cooler, quieter in certain ways, longer in its shadows, and often more physically distinct. Morning was not just a scheduled beginning. It arrived with a rise in light, a shift in air, a change in sound, and a return of visibility across land and shelter. These repeated transitions gave the body a dependable sense of sequence without demanding conscious attention. A person did not need to manage the full burden of internal timing alone, because the world itself kept providing cues. That pattern held across many forms of human life, from open landscapes to simple shelters to more settled communities. Conditions differed, but the body remained in contact with the fact that the world changed around it. This long exposure helped shape a physiology that was not sealed off from environment but regulated through contact with it. The body cooled as nights cooled. It woke into increasing light. It adjusted across seasons not because those changes were convenient, but because they were impossible to ignore. Even fire, clothing, walls, and later built interiors did not erase this relationship at first. They softened exposure, yet they did not replace the world with a controlled duplicate. The body still knew whether dawn came early or late, whether the air stayed dry or held moisture, whether the season was tightening or opening. Over immense stretches of human history, this meant that biological rhythm was not an isolated mechanism hidden inside the body. It was partly scaffolded by the outside world. This is why the modern reduction of environmental feedback may matter more than it first appears. A body kept in similar light, similar temperature, and similar interior conditions across most of the day and night is not simply protected. It is also receiving fewer transitions strong enough to guide its internal changes. The passage from activity to rest becomes easier to postpone, and the boundary between day and night can become thinner in experience, even when the clock says otherwise. The body may remain awake later not only because of habit, but because the world around it no longer shifts with the same force. It may move into rest less smoothly because evening no longer arrives as a full environmental event. This does not create one dramatic failure. It creates a quieter uncertainty. The body still has ancient systems for tracking light, temperature, and timing, but those systems are now often asked to operate inside spaces where contrast has been reduced. Looking back to the beginning of the human story makes the loss easier to understand. Early humans did not live in a world that adjusted itself to their preferred rhythm. Their bodies had to align with the rhythms already present in land, weather, and season. That long dependence left a mark. It made the body a listener to the environment. When the environment grows more muted, more stable, and more separate from natural transitions, the body does not instantly become independent of what it once relied on. It continues listening, even when the signals are faint. It waits for evening to feel like evening, for dawn to feel like dawn, for time to arrive through atmosphere rather than instruction. To say that humans lost something important may also mean this. The body once lived inside a world that helped organize it from outside. Now that world is quieter, and the body must carry more of the burden alone. Sleep did not begin as a single continuous block of time. It was not originally organized into one long, uninterrupted period set neatly between night and morning. For much of human history, sleep followed patterns that were more flexible, more responsive to conditions, and less tightly bound to a fixed schedule. In environments where light faded gradually and darkness did not always bring complete safety, the body did not fully surrender to stillness for many hours at once. Instead, rest often unfolded in segments, shaped by temperature, noise, light, and the need to remain partially aware of the surroundings. This did not mean that early humans never slept deeply, but it suggests that deep sleep was only one part of a broader pattern. Periods of lighter rest, brief awakenings, and shifts in position were common. The body did not resist these interruptions. It incorporated them. Over time, this created a system in which sleep was not defined by strict continuity, but by the ability to return to rest repeatedly. Archaeological evidence cannot directly show how long a person slept in one stretch, but indirect clues from living environments, exposure to natural light cycles, and comparisons with traditional societies indicate that segmented sleep was likely widespread. Without artificial lighting, the length of night varied across seasons. sometimes extending far beyond the amount of time the body required for deep rest. In such conditions, it would be natural for sleep to divide into phases, with periods of quiet wakefulness in between. These intervals were not necessarily signs of disturbance. They could be calm, reflective, or simply passive, part of a rhythm that did not demand complete unconsciousness from dusk to dawn. Early humans did not enter sleep as a single, sealed state. They moved in and out of it, adjusting to the environment and to their own internal signals. The presence of others also shaped this pattern. In small groups, not everyone would be fully asleep at the same time. Some individuals might remain more alert, whether intentionally or not, creating a shared state of partial awareness within the group. This distributed vigilance did not require strict coordination. It emerged naturally from overlapping sleep cycles. The result was a form of rest that balanced recovery with a minimal level of environmental responsiveness. When considering early populations such as Homo sapiens in open or lightly sheltered settings, this pattern becomes even more plausible. Exposure to sound, shifting temperature, and intermittent light would make a single unbroken sleep period less consistent. The body adapted not by eliminating these influences, but by becoming able to resume rest after them. In contrast, modern expectations of sleep often emphasize continuity and depth above all else. A full night of uninterrupted sleep is treated as the ideal, and any awakening is frequently interpreted as a problem. Yet this expectation may not fully align with the older structure of human rest. When the body wakes briefly during the night, it may not always be signaling failure. It may be expressing a pattern that was once normal. The difference is that modern environments, with controlled light and stable conditions, encourage the idea that sleep should be continuous. When that continuity breaks, it stands out more clearly against a background of expectation. This can change how the experience is interpreted, turning a natural transition into a perceived disruption. The body itself, however, may not have completely abandoned its earlier patterns. It still moves through stages of lighter and deeper sleep. It still shifts position, adjusts breathing, and responds to subtle changes in the environment. The difference lies in how these processes are framed. What was once part of a flexible rhythm becomes something to be corrected or minimized. Looking back toward the long beginning of human life, sleep appears less like a single event, and more like a sequence of states, connected but not identical. It was shaped by the environment, by group dynamics, and by the body's ability to remain responsive even while resting. When this structure is replaced by an expectation of uninterrupted stillness, something may be lost. Not necessarily the ability to sleep, but the acceptance of variation within sleep itself. That variation once allowed the body to recover in a world that did not pause completely at night. To understand what has changed, it is necessary to consider that the body may still carry traces of that older rhythm, even in a world that now asks for something more continuous and more controlled. To sleep in fragments is not the same as sleeping badly. That distinction matters because modern assumptions often treat any break in sleep as evidence that something has gone wrong. But for much of human history, the body did not approach the night as a sealed container that had to remain unbroken from beginning to end. It approached the night as a changing span of time within which rest could deepen, lighten, pause, and begin again. Darkness itself was not uniform. It had phases. Evening arrived gradually, then settled into deeper night, and eventually gave way to the earliest hints of morning. The body moved through that changing darkness with its own shifting states. At some points it drifted into heavier rest. At others it rose closer to awareness, not always in alarm, but because complete disconnection from the surroundings was neither possible nor always useful. In a world without sealed walls, electrical light, or reliable insulation from sound and temperature, sleep had to remain somewhat permeable. The body could not vanish entirely from its environment for long stretches. It had to retain the ability to return from sleep in response to cold, noise, movement nearby, or subtle changes in the social group. This does not mean that prehistoric nights were defined by constant fear. It means only that rest developed under conditions where the world did not fully stop, and so the body learned to rest without requiring perfect continuity. That older pattern may explain why waking in the night can feel strangely familiar, even when it is unwelcome. The body may not always interpret a brief return to awareness as a crisis. It may simply be passing through a form of transition that was once ordinary. Historical evidence from later pre-industrial societies, as well as sleep research informed by natural light exposure, suggests that humans can sleep in more than one major segment when environmental conditions allow for long nights and low artificial stimulation. Quiet wakefulness between periods of sleep may not be an anomaly imposed by modern stress alone. It may also reflect an older human capacity that has never fully disappeared. This is easier to understand when sleep is seen not as a mechanical switch, but as a layered biological process. The body does not fall into one single state and remain there unchanged. It cycles, shifts, and rebalances. It moves through lighter and deeper stages, sometimes approaching the edge of waking without fully crossing it. In natural settings, that edge may have been crossed more often and with less anxiety. A person might wake briefly, listen to the surrounding night, adjust posture, feel the air, register the presence of others, and return to sleep without treating the interruption as failure. In small human groups, these patterns may even have overlapped in useful ways. One person stirring while another remained in deep sleep would create a subtle spread of awareness across the group without any formal plan. Such a pattern would fit a species whose rest evolved in shared spaces, under changing environmental conditions, and without the modern expectation that unconsciousness should remain perfectly continuous for many hours. Looking back toward the early path of human life, the point becomes clearer. The body's sleep was shaped before comfort, privacy, and schedule were stabilized in the way they are now. It was shaped when nights were long in winter, shorter in other seasons, and filled with environmental variation that could not be excluded. In such a setting, fragmented sleep was not necessarily damaged sleep. It was often adaptable sleep. The body learned not just how to fall asleep, but how to return to it. That return may be one of the older skills modern life has taught people to distrust. Once uninterrupted sleep becomes the standard, every brief waking can feel like a defect. Yet the body may still carry a memory of nights that were less smooth, but not less human. Something important may have been lost when sleep became defined almost entirely by continuity. The body may still know how to rest in chapters, even in a world that insists it should rest in one unbroken line. When sleep is expected to be continuous, the body is asked to behave in a way that may not fully reflect how it was shaped. The expectation itself becomes part of the experience. A brief awakening is no longer just a transition. It becomes something to notice, to measure, and often to question. This shift does not come from the body alone. It comes from a world that has learned to structure time more precisely, to divide night and day into fixed segments, and to define rest as a single uninterrupted block. In such a setting, variation inside sleep can feel out of place, even if the body still moves through it naturally. The difference is not only physical, it is also interpretive. The same moment of waking can be understood either as a normal passage within a longer rhythm, or as a sign that something has gone wrong. For most of human history, there was little reason to treat that moment as a problem. The night was long, often longer than the body needed for its deepest phases of rest. There was space for waking and returning, for shifting position, for listening to the surroundings without urgency. These small returns to awareness did not carry the same meaning they often carry now. They were part of how the body remained connected to the environment, even while resting. In earlier settings, that connection had practical value. It allowed individuals to respond if needed, to adjust to changes in temperature or sound, and to remain loosely synchronized with others nearby. Sleep was not a complete withdrawal. It was a reduced state of engagement that could deepen or lighten as conditions changed. This pattern may have extended across many generations, shaping a body that did not require perfect continuity in order to recover. Over time, as human environments became more enclosed, more controlled, and more structured around schedules, the meaning of sleep began to shift. Night was no longer simply a span of darkness shaped by season and location. It became a designated period with a defined beginning and end. Artificial lighting extended activity into hours that were once reserved for rest. Work and social structures reinforced the idea that sleep should fit neatly into a single block, leaving the rest of the day free for other demands. Within this framework, any interruption became more visible. A person who wakes in the middle of the night may now be aware of the remaining hours before morning, aware of expectations about total sleep, aware of the idea that continuity has been broken. This awareness can change the experience itself, making it harder to return to rest even when the body is capable of doing so. The body, however, may still be moving through older patterns. It may still shift between lighter and deeper states, still pass through moments where waking is close to the surface. These transitions do not necessarily indicate damage. They may reflect a system that was not originally designed for strict uniformity. Looking back toward early human life, this becomes part of a broader pattern. The body did not evolve in isolation from the conditions of the night. It evolved within them. Those conditions included darkness that was not absolute, temperatures that changed gradually, sounds that rose and fell, and group settings where individuals rested in proximity to one another. Sleep, in that context, was shaped by a world that did not fully disappear when the eyes closed. It continued to press gently against the body, influencing how deeply it could rest and how easily it could return. To say that humans lost something important may also mean that sleep has been narrowed into a single form, when it may once have existed in several. The body may still hold the capacity for a more flexible rhythm, but that rhythm is now often measured against a standard that leaves little room for variation. The cost is not always obvious. It may appear as a subtle tension between what the body does and what it is expected to do. Over time, that tension can make even natural transitions feel like interruptions, and in that quiet shift, something older begins to fade from the experience of rest. For most of human history, the body was rarely still for very long, even on days that would not have been recognized as physically demanding. Human beings did not live by dividing movement into a separate category called exercise and everything else into rest. Movement was woven into ordinary life in small, repeated actions that filled the day without announcing themselves. Walking to gather water, shifting position while working with tools, crouching near a fire, carrying materials, adjusting camp spaces, standing, kneeling, turning, reaching, and rising again all formed a quiet layer of constant motion. These actions did not always require high effort, but they prevented the body from settling into long blocks of immobility. That difference matters because the human body appears to have been shaped not only by bursts of labor or travel, but by the steady presence of low-level movement spread across waking life. Muscles, joints, circulation and posture systems were not waiting for a designated period of activity to begin functioning. They were being engaged in small ways almost all the time. In archaeological reconstructions of hunter-gatherer and early agrarian life, the focus often falls on large visible tasks such as hunting, carrying loads, building shelters, or cultivating land. Yet beneath those larger tasks was another pattern that may have mattered just as much: the body's near constant repositioning within its environment. A person preparing food on the ground would shift weight repeatedly. A person tending a fire would lean, reach, turn, and rise. A person moving through uneven terrain would make ongoing adjustments through the feet, hips, and spine. These motions were ordinary, but that is exactly why they were important. They formed the background condition in which the body developed. Early humans did not spend most of the day seated in stable positions with the skeleton externally supported by furniture and flat flooring. They remained in active contact with the ground, tools, weather, and changing terrain, and that contact required small mechanical responses from the body almost without pause. Looking back to the long beginning of human life, before built environments became dense and predictable, this low-level motion was not a lifestyle choice. It was simply what happened when survival and daily function took place in open or minimally structured settings. The body's systems for balance, circulation, and muscular tone were therefore reinforced not only by dramatic effort, but by continuity of use. This is one reason modern stillness may feel heavier than it appears. The body may not only be missing vigorous activity, it may also be missing thousands of quiet adjustments that once linked 1 hour to the next. In modern conditions, a person can remain seated, supported, and visually engaged for long stretches while the body performs very little physical negotiation with the environment. The muscles required for posture may work in narrow, repetitive ways, but many of the older patterns of varied low-level movement become reduced. The feet no longer read uneven ground. The hips no longer rotate through as many natural transitions. The spine may remain in one general configuration for extended periods. None of this is dramatic by itself, yet the cumulative effect may be profound. The body that evolved amid continuous mild motion is asked instead to tolerate long periods of controlled stillness, interrupted by short planned activity, if activity comes at all. That arrangement may satisfy schedules, but it does not resemble the conditions under which the body spent most of its history. What may have been lost, then, is not movement in the obvious sense alone. It is the invisible fabric of movement that once held the day together. Not the run, not the hunt, not the single great exertion, but the background rhythm of bending, shifting, carrying, stepping, and adjusting that kept the body in conversation with gravity and place. When that background disappears, the body does not always respond with immediate crisis. More often, it responds with a quieter signal. Stiffness without clear injury, fatigue without hard labor, restlessness without destination. These are not simple proofs, and they should not be exaggerated, but they do suggest that the body may be paying for the loss of something older and more ordinary than exercise itself. It may be paying for the disappearance of constant low-level movement, the kind of movement that once made human life physically continuous from morning until night. The absence of constant low-level movement changes the body in ways that are easy to overlook because the loss is made of such small pieces. A person can still walk from room to room, stand up occasionally, and complete the visible tasks of a normal day. Yet the body may still be missing the older pattern that once shaped it. That older pattern was not defined by intensity, it was defined by continuity. Human beings used to spend much of the day adjusting to ground height, carrying uneven loads, turning the torso while working with the hands, lowering the body toward the earth, rising again without support, and shifting weight from one leg to the other in response to terrain, weather, tools, and other people. These actions did not produce the feeling of formal exertion every time they occurred, but they kept the body from becoming mechanically fixed. The feet remained active readers of surface. The hips remained part of nearly every task. The spine rotated, bent, and rebalanced in many directions. The arms did not work alone while the rest of the body stayed quiet. Movement passed through the whole frame. This matters because the body's tissues seem to depend not only on occasional demand, but on regular variation of demand. A joint that moves through many small ranges during the day is living in a different world from a joint that stays near the same angle for hours. A back that keeps adjusting to crouching, reaching, stepping, and turning is living in a different world from a back that holds a narrow range of posture under prolonged support. For most of human history, ordinary survival did not allow the body to become too specialized in stillness. Even rest was often interrupted by the need to rise, tend something, move toward warmth, or change position in response to the ground. The day itself became a chain of low effort, repeated actions that asked the body to remain available to movement at almost all times. Looking toward the early human past, this pattern appears again and again across different environments. Whether people lived by foraging, fishing, tending small plots, traveling seasonally, or combining several subsistence strategies, daily life still involved repeated bodily transitions. The environment did not bring objects conveniently to the hands. Water, fuel, food, and tools were approached physically. Work happened close to the ground as often as above it. Paths were uneven, shelters simple, and tasks distributed across spaces rather than compressed into one stationary position. Even without imagining prehistoric life in detail, the broader point remains solid. The human body developed in a world where light movement was not an optional supplement to life. It was the medium through which life was carried out. Modern life often reverses this arrangement. Many tasks can now be completed while the body remains largely in one place. The hands may stay active, the eyes may remain intensely engaged, and the mind may work continuously, but the larger body performs far fewer transitions. Sitting becomes the default platform from which work, communication, entertainment, and even eating take place. Standing can also become static when the environment is flat, controlled, and repetitive. As a result, the body may go long stretches without the subtle shifts that once linked one action to the next. This can create a strange contradiction. A person may feel tired by the end of the day, yet the body has not moved in the layered, varied way that human history would suggest was once ordinary. Fatigue remains, but the older mechanical rhythm is absent. This may help explain why rest sometimes fails to feel fully restorative in a modern setting. the body is not simply asking for less effort. It may be asking for a different pattern of effort, one made of small repeated motions rather than isolated episodes. To lose that pattern is to lose a quiet form of regulation. Muscles no longer share work in the same distributed way. Joints no longer receive the same range of ordinary use. Gravity is managed more by furniture and architecture, and less by ongoing bodily response. The body still functions within this new arrangement, but it may do so with a kind of background incompleteness, not because it is weak, and not because the past should be romanticized, but because something deeply ordinary has thinned out. The body once lived inside a fabric of constant, gentle movement. Now much of that fabric has been removed, and the silence left behind may be part of what the body is paying for. What makes the loss of low-level movement so important is that it does not disappear all at once. It fades quietly, replaced by convenience, support, and efficiency, until the body begins living in a different physical rhythm without any dramatic change announcing it. A person no longer has to lower the body to the ground to work, rise repeatedly from uneven surfaces, carry small loads across irregular terrain, or shift posture in response to weather, tools, and natural space. Many tasks are brought upward, stabilized, and compressed into narrow zones of motion. The hands remain busy, the eyes remain busy, the mind remains busy, but the larger body is asked to do much less. This reduction is easy to miss, because life can still feel tiring. Yet tiredness and movement are not the same thing. The body can be mentally strained, visually overloaded, and emotionally worn down while remaining mechanically underused. That difference may be one of the quieter forms of mismatch in modern life. For most of human history, the body did not need to search for movement, because movement was built into the structure of ordinary existence. It emerged from the distance between things, from the height of the ground, from the absence of furniture, from the need to turn, lift, bend, stoop, step, and rebalance again and again. Even when no single action was intense, the accumulation mattered. It kept circulation linked to posture, posture linked to terrain, and terrain linked to attention. The body was not resting in between separate tasks as often as it was flowing between them through minor transitions. This may be one reason early human life, however difficult in other respects, kept the body more continuously engaged with gravity. Gravity was not something mostly managed by chairs, floors, mattresses, and fixed indoor surfaces. It was managed by muscle tone, balance, foot placement, joint rotation, and repeated self-support. Looking back toward the long beginnings of the species, this pattern appears less like a preference and more like a condition of being human in a minimally engineered world. Before stable interiors and seated labor became widespread, the body had to keep solving small physical problems all day long. How to reach from here, how to settle there, how to carry this, how to turn without losing balance. These problems were not separate from life. They were life, and through that constant use, the body remained distributed in its effort. No single region carried everything for too long, because posture and activity changed repeatedly. In modern settings, the opposite can happen. A narrow set of muscles and positions may dominate for hours, while many older patterns of movement fall silent. The body becomes active in concentrated ways and inactive in broad ways. Over time, that concentration may help explain why discomfort can appear without clear injury, why stiffness can gather without heavy labor, and why the body can feel restless after a day that involved little true physical negotiation with the world. None of this proves that the past was healthier in any simple sense. Early human life included hardship, exposure, and limits that should not be romanticized. But it does suggest that the body was formed under conditions of continual mild motion, and that this motion was not optional background detail. It was one of the ordinary pressures that shaped how the body expected to live. When that pressure is removed, the body is not simply freed from effort. It is also separated from a form of everyday regulation that once helped keep joints, muscles, balance, and posture in ongoing conversation. Something important may have been lost not when humans stopped performing great physical feats, but when they stopped moving a little almost all the time. That is a harder loss to notice because it leaves no dramatic absence. It leaves only a quieter body in a more supported world, a body asked to remain still for longer than its history prepared it for, and a body that may respond not with collapse, but with small, persistent signals that something ancient has gone missing. For most of human history, food did not arrive at fixed hours, in consistent portions, or with the expectation that the body should always be ready to receive it. Human beings lived for a very long time under conditions where eating depended on season, movement, success, storage limits, weather, and the simple uncertainty of what the day would provide. This does not mean that early humans were always starving, nor does it mean that irregular eating was harmless or easy. It means only that the body was formed in a world where nourishment often came in uneven rhythms. Some days brought more, some less. Some seasons offered abundance, while others narrowed what could be gathered, hunted, dug up, or preserved. In such a world, the body did not learn to expect the same quantity of food at the same times every day. It learned to remain flexible in the face of variation. That flexibility was not a luxury, it was part of survival. The digestive system, the regulation of hunger, the storage of energy, and the pacing of effort all had to function within a pattern that was rarely smooth. This is important because modern eating often assumes the opposite. Meals are arranged by clock time, not only by appetite or opportunity. Food is available with a regularity that would have been historically unusual, and the body is often encouraged to behave as though consistent intake is its natural baseline. Yet for most of the species' long development, the body's relationship with food was shaped by unpredictability more than precision. Archaeological evidence from hunter-gatherer populations and early agricultural communities shows that food strategies were diverse and highly dependent on local ecologies. There was no single ancestral diet, and no single schedule that can be projected backward with certainty. But what does appear across environments is variability. Access to food changed from place to place and from time to time, and daily intake was not always neatly divided into breakfast, midday meal, and evening meal. In many settings, eating would have followed the realities of labor, travel, sharing within the group, and the timing of available resources. A body living within these conditions had to tolerate periods of waiting. It had to continue moving, thinking, and maintaining warmth even when food was not immediately present. Over long stretches of human history, this created a metabolism shaped not by constant supply, but by intermittent supply. Looking back toward the deep beginning of human life, before storage systems became reliable and before settled food routines became common, this pattern would have been especially strong. Early humans moved through landscapes where edible resources were scattered and seasonal. Even when knowledge of the land was rich and skillful, that knowledge did not erase uncertainty. The body remained tied to the uneven timing of the environment. This matters because the experience of hunger was not always a sign that something had gone wrong. It was often part of the normal space between one food opportunity and the next. The body did not interpret every interval without food as an emergency. It learned to work within those intervals. In modern conditions, the interval itself can begin to disappear. Food is not only abundant in many settings, it is also immediate, visible, and detached from season, place, and effort in ways that are historically new. As a result, the body may spend less time moving through the natural alternation between fullness and emptiness that once shaped human life. This does not mean that irregular eating should be idealized, nor that older conditions were healthier in a simple sense. Scarcity carried real costs, and hunger could be dangerous. But it does suggest that the body was not formed inside a world of constant access. It was formed inside a world where energy arrived unevenly, and where the body had to bridge those gaps with its own reserves, rhythms, and restraint. To say that humans lost something important may therefore include the loss of a deeper familiarity with fluctuation itself. The body once lived in closer contact with the pauses between meals, the uncertainty between sources, and the need to remain steady without immediate replenishment. When that older rhythm fades, the body is not simply better fed. It is placed into a new relationship with appetite, timing, and expectation, one in which the ancient logic of uneven nourishment becomes harder for modern life to hear. The body does not only respond to what it eats, it also responds to when food arrives, how often it arrives, and whether nourishment comes with predictability or delay. For most of human history, those conditions were unstable enough that the body could not depend on regular supply as a constant rule. This did not create one universal eating pattern, because human groups lived in very different climates and ecologies, but it did create a shared reality of fluctuation. Food was tied to movement, season, storage, weather, social sharing, and the success or failure of daily effort. In such a world, the space between meals was not empty in a modern sense. It was part of the normal structure of life. Hunger was not always pleasant, but neither was it always treated as immediate malfunction. The body often had to continue across hours of waiting, using stored energy, slowing certain impulses, and adjusting effort until food was found, prepared, or shared. This matters because modern food environments often separate eating from uncertainty almost completely. A person may eat not only because energy is low, but because food is available, visible, scheduled, or socially expected. The body then receives nourishment according to rules that are often external to appetite and external to environment. Morning, noon, and evening become fixed points, and the intervals between them may be filled as well. That regularity can reduce hardship, but it also changes the body's relationship with anticipation. The older human body was formed in a world where anticipation itself mattered. It had to tolerate delay. It had to remain functional while food was absent. It had to bridge the distance between one opportunity and the next, without assuming the next would arrive at the same hour tomorrow. When archaeologists and anthropologists study foraging populations or early subsistence systems, one point becomes clear again and again. There was no single clock-governed structure that defines the human past. Some people ate when a hunt succeeded. Some ate when gathered foods were processed. Some ate more at one point in the day and less at another, depending on labor, season, and available resources. Early agricultural societies introduced new forms of rhythm, but even then, food remained vulnerable to harvest cycles, spoilage, labor demands, and uneven access. Reliability increased gradually and unevenly, not all at once. Looking further back, toward the long emergence of early humans, the picture becomes even less fixed. Before large storage systems, before permanent kitchens, before markets and preserved abundance, food was inseparable from landscape. It had to be approached physically and often waited for. The body, therefore, did not merely digest food. It learned to live around intervals without it. This may help explain why appetite is more than a simple meter that drops and must be refilled on schedule. Appetite was shaped within a species history where signals of hunger had to coexist with patience, movement, and uncertainty. In that setting, being empty for a time was not necessarily a biological mistake. It was often a passage. The modern loss may not be scarcity itself, because scarcity brought real suffering and cannot be romanticized. The loss may be something subtler, the body's older familiarity with uneven timing. Once food becomes constantly near, the body is not simply protected from danger. It is also moved into a world where the oscillation between intake and waiting becomes weaker. The digestive system, the daily rhythm of energy, and even the emotional meaning of hunger begin to change under those conditions. Hunger can start to feel abnormal more quickly, not because the body was designed for constant abundance, but because the environment now teaches it to expect faster resolution. Looking back to the beginning of the human story keeps this question grounded. Humans did not become human in a world of permanent access. They became human in a world where nourishment appeared through time, effort, and variation. To lose that older rhythm is not to lose a romantic past. It is to lose one of the quiet conditions that once trained the body to remain steady between moments of supply. Something important may have faded when eating stopped being one event within a changing environment and became a near-continuous possibility. The body may still carry an ancient memory of intervals, even in a world that now tries to erase them. What may matter most about the older human relationship with food is not that it was difficult, but that it taught the body to live within variation. A meal was not always the beginning of comfort, and the next meal was not always guaranteed by routine. Between one moment of eating and another, the body often had to continue without immediate resolution, carrying itself through work, movement, weather, and thought, while nourishment remained absent for a time. This pattern did not belong to one region or one way of life alone. It appeared in different forms across foraging societies, early settled communities, seasonal migrations, and mixed subsistence worlds where people relied on what the land, climate, and collective effort could provide. The details differed, but the deeper rhythm was similar. Food came in pulses, not in perfect lines. Some periods brought abundance, others narrowing. Some days allowed more eating, others demanded restraint, patience, or simple endurance. Over many generations, this would have shaped not only digestion, but expectation. The body was not trained to assume that every rise in appetite should be answered immediately. It was trained to continue through intervals, drawing on stored energy and adjusting effort as needed. This does not mean hunger was harmless. It could be dangerous, painful, and deeply limiting. Periods of real scarcity left marks on bodies and communities, and they should not be turned into a false ideal. But between abundance and starvation there existed a wide territory of ordinary fluctuation, and it is within that territory that much of human history unfolded. The body lived there for a very long time. It learned not only how to eat, but how to wait. Looking back toward the early path of human life, before large-scale storage, before global trade, before the reliable appearance of food at the same hour in the same place, the body would have encountered this waiting again and again. Even skilled knowledge of the landscape did not remove uncertainty. A hunting attempt could fail. Gathered foods could be seasonal or dispersed. Weather could shift. Travel could delay preparation. Sharing within a group could alter how much one individual received at a given moment. All of this meant that nourishment belonged to a broader ecological rhythm rather than a fixed daily script. The human body, shaped inside that rhythm, appears to have retained an ability to function across uneven supply. That older capacity may help explain why the modern experience of food can feel strangely intensified. In a world where eating is often detached from season, labor, and place, appetite may be answered sooner, more often, and with less interruption than the body's long history would suggest was common. The interval between wanting and receiving becomes shorter. The sight of food, the schedule of meals, and the constant availability of snacks or stored calories can reduce the body's contact with emptiness as a normal passing state. As a result, hunger may begin to feel less like one point within a larger rhythm and more like a disruption that should be solved at once. This shift is subtle, but it changes the meaning of appetite. The body may still contain systems shaped by fluctuation, yet it now lives in conditions that soften or remove many of the pauses that once trained those systems. To say that humans lost something important may also mean that they lost a more familiar relationship with intervals themselves. Not because irregularity was kinder, and not because scarcity should be praised, but because the body came from a world in which nourishment was part of a moving pattern of presence and absence. That pattern taught the body a certain steadiness, a certain tolerance for not being immediately filled. When that pattern fades, the body is not simply receiving more food, it is receiving food inside a different structure of time, one that may nourish it materially while also distancing it from an older biological rhythm. The cost of that loss is not always dramatic. It may appear only as a quieter mismatch between appetite and expectation, between the body's long memory of uneven supply and the modern promise that emptiness should never last very long. The skin remembers a world that modern life often keeps at a distance. It is easy to think of skin as a boundary, a surface that seals the body off from everything outside it. But for most of human history, it functioned more like an instrument of contact. Wind moved across it, cold reached it, sunlight altered it, moisture stayed on it, dust settled into it, and the pressure of ground, plants, hides, water, smoke, and changing air continuously gave it information about where the body was and what kind of world surrounded it. Early humans did not live inside interiors that filtered most of these signals away. Even when they used shelter, clothing, or fire, the skin remained in conversation with the environment. It was rarely allowed to forget the season, the hour, the dryness of the air, or the fact that the world outside the body was active and present. This matters because the skin is not passive. It is part of the body's larger system of orientation, temperature regulation, protection, and sensory awareness. It helps the body register contrast. It helps mark the difference between warmth and cold, dryness and dampness, exposure and enclosure. Over very long stretches of time, this constant contact would have shaped not only comfort, but expectation. The body did not emerge in a world of soft fabrics, sealed surfaces, and consistent indoor climates. It emerged in a world where the skin was one of the main places through which the environment could speak. Looking back toward the deep beginning of human life, before fully built interiors became normal, this is especially clear. Early members of the genus Homo and later Homo sapiens moved through open landscapes, temporary shelters, cave spaces, riverbanks, wooded zones, and seasonal camps where the line between the body and the surrounding world was never absolute. Clothing, when present, reduced exposure but did not erase it. Fire offered warmth, but usually in a local and shifting way. Shelter blocked some wind or rain, but rarely created the kind of sealed atmospheric stability that many modern bodies now take for granted. The skin therefore remained involved in the body's understanding of the world. It helped regulate heat loss, guided behavior, and contributed to the body's sense of whether it should tense, relax, seek warmth, or move. In modern life, much of this contact is reduced. The body is layered with materials designed to maintain comfort. Indoor temperatures are kept within narrower ranges, and many surfaces between skin and world are intentionally softened, dried, cleaned, or stabilized. These changes can reduce hardship and protect health, but they also alter the amount and variety of information reaching the body through touch and exposure. The skin still functions, of course, but the world reaching it becomes more controlled. The body receives fewer transitions, fewer textures, fewer direct reminders that it is part of a changing environment rather than separate from it. This may create a quieter form of sensory narrowing. The skin is no longer asked to interpret as much variation from day to day, and as a result, the body may become more dependent on managed conditions than on its own ability to accommodate gradual changes. This does not mean the body becomes weaker in a dramatic sense, nor that past exposure should be idealized. Too much exposure could harm, and protection has real value. But something subtle may still be lost when the skin ceases to act as a living bridge between organism and environment. What fades is not simply tolerance for cold or roughness. It may be a whole layer of low-level dialogue between body and world. The body once learned through its surface. It learned what time of day felt like, what season felt like, what open air felt like after enclosure, and what earth, water, plant matter, smoke, and wind each meant when they touched the skin. When these signals become rare, modern comfort does more than protect the body. It also quiets one of its oldest channels of orientation. To say that humans lost something important may therefore include this. The body once knew the world, not only by seeing it or moving through it, but by being touched by it almost constantly, and the skin still carries the memory of that older intimacy. The skin does more than feel the world. It teaches the body how near or far that world is. For most of human history, that teaching happened almost without pause. Air moved over exposed areas of the body and changed from hour to hour. Surfaces were rarely uniform. Water cooled the skin and then left it to dry in open air. Smoke clung to it near fire. Dust and soil settled into it during movement and work. Even simple clothing did not erase these contacts. It changed them, filtered them, and sometimes softened them, but the body still remained in direct relationship with the surrounding environment through its outer layer. This matters because the skin is one of the oldest places where the body receives information about change. It detects not only danger or pain, but gradation. Slight cooling at dusk, lingering warmth after daylight, dampness rising from ground or vegetation, roughness from bark, stone, woven plant fibers, hides, and earth. All of these would have helped the body register where it was, what conditions were forming, and how the next part of the day might feel. This did not require conscious interpretation. The skin was already reading the world before thought gave it a name. In that sense, the body was never fully enclosed within itself. It remained open through touch, temperature, pressure, and exposure. Looking back toward the early human past, this openness was not occasional. It was built into ordinary life. Before controlled interiors, sealed fabrics, and stable indoor climates became widespread, the skin lived closer to weather and material reality. A person could feel the difference between shade and open sun, between dry season and wet season, between the warmth of another body nearby and the cooling effect of moving air in a shelter at night. The body learned from these gradients over countless generations. The skin became part of how the organism oriented itself to time, place, and condition. It helped the body know whether it should conserve heat, seek cover, move toward warmth, or remain where it was. It also helped anchor the body in the material world. Touch was not reduced to occasional sensation. It was a continuous stream of contact that reminded the body that it was surrounded, not isolated. Modern life changes this relationship in quiet but powerful ways. Clothing now often aims to maintain a narrow zone of comfort regardless of weather. Interiors reduce the range of temperatures the skin encounters. Floors, furniture, bedding, and work surfaces are made to feel stable and predictable. Cleanliness, softness, and climate control all lessen friction between body and environment. These changes can reduce suffering and protect against real harm, but they also reduce the number of messages the skin receives from the world. The body still touches, but it often touches managed materials more than living conditions. It feels the repeated textures of manufactured surfaces more than the changing textures of ground, air, water, and plant matter. Over time, this can create a different kind of bodily experience, one in which the skin remains functional but less informed by variation. The body may still see the weather through windows, yet it does not always feel the weather deeply enough for the skin to help organize response. It may still know that seasons are changing, yet it learns this more through calendar and sight than through repeated contact on the skin itself. This may be one reason the body can seem oddly sensitive inside a world built to protect it. Sensitivity is not always weakness. Sometimes it is what remains when an old channel of adaptation receives fewer signals than before. The skin, shaped over a long human history of exposure, may still be waiting for a richer conversation with the world than modern conditions usually allow. This does not mean that the past should be copied or that exposure is always beneficial. Too much cold, damp, heat, or abrasion can damage the body. But between harm and complete buffering there once existed a broad field of ordinary contact, and the human body lived there for a very long time. To lose that field is to lose more than roughness or endurance. It is to lose a layer of sensory orientation that once helped the body feel where it stood within nature. Humans may have lost something important when the skin stopped being a daily witness to the outside world and became, more often, a surface kept protected from it. What may have been lost through the skin is difficult to name because it does not disappear like a tool or a habit. It fades as contact fades. The body is still touched, but it is touched by a narrower world. Air is filtered, surfaces are standardized, fabrics are softened, and many of the small frictions that once connected the body to place are reduced before they can fully register. The result is not simply greater comfort. It is a quieter sensory field. For most of human history, the skin lived inside a much denser stream of variation. It felt the difference between morning chill and midday warmth, between open wind and protected shade, between dry dust and damp ground, between rough fibers, animal hides, plant matter, smoke, ash, and bare earth. These contacts were not rare experiences added to life from time to time. They were part of the ordinary structure of being human in a world that had not yet been heavily filtered. The skin, therefore, helped form a kind of memory that was not verbal and not abstract. It remembered by repeated contact. It remembered what cooling air meant as evening approached. It remembered how long dampness stayed after rain or river water. It remembered the physical truth that the body was always near larger conditions it did not control. This matters because the skin is not only a protective layer, it is one of the body's oldest ways of locating itself within reality. Through pressure, warmth, texture, and moving air, it tells the organism that it is here, now, in this place, under these conditions. The more varied that contact is, the richer the body's sense of orientation becomes. Looking back toward the long beginning of human life, this kind of orientation would have been constant. Early humans did not only see their environment, they wore it, carried it, absorbed it, and were marked by it across the day. Their bodies remained porous to changes in temperature, humidity, and texture even when they were sheltered. Fire warmed one side of the skin while cooler air touched the other. Ground contact differed from one campsite to the next. Water, plants, dust, and wind kept reaching the body in ways that no modern interior fully reproduces. Over immense stretches of time, this would have shaped a body that did not expect full sensory buffering. It expected some degree of contact, some regular reminder that the world was pressing gently against it. Modern life often interrupts that expectation. The skin is protected more completely, but it is also less engaged. The body may move from one controlled atmosphere to another, from one stable texture to the next, without receiving many of the older signals that once helped it register season, place, and environmental change. This does not create one dramatic injury. It creates a subtler loss. The skin remains capable of feeling, yet the range of what it is asked to feel becomes smaller. That narrowing may help explain why the body can seem both sheltered and strangely unsettled at the same time. It is no longer struggling with the same exposures, but neither is it receiving the same sensory guidance. The outside world becomes something more often observed than physically known. This is not a reason to romanticize hardship. Exposure could wound, exhaust, and shorten life. Protection matters. But between danger and complete insulation there once existed a broad middle ground of ordinary touch, and humans lived within it for a very long time. In that middle ground, the skin helped organize the body's relationship to environment without needing language, theory, or intention. It quietly taught the body what changing reality felt like. To say that humans lost something important may therefore include the loss of this older intimacy. Not intimacy as emotion, but intimacy as repeated physical truth. The body once learned the world through the skin every day, and when that lesson becomes faint, the cost may appear not as obvious harm, but as a growing distance between the body and the material conditions that once shaped its sense of being alive. For most of human history, the human nervous system developed inside small groups, repeated faces, and a social world that changed slowly enough for the body to recognize its place within it. Human beings were never solitary in any deep ancestral sense, but neither were they surrounded by the dense, layered, and continuous social exposure that now fills so much of modern life. The older human social environment was intimate in scale. A person might spend most of life among a limited number of familiar individuals, across shared routines, shared risks, and shared spaces. This did not make early life easy or peaceful. Small groups could contain tension, hierarchy, loss, and conflict. But even within those realities, the social field was narrower. The body and nervous system were not required to process hundreds of weak ties, constant indirect comparison, repeated interactions with strangers, and the near unbroken awareness of distant lives. Instead, social life was grounded in presence. People knew one another through repeated contact, direct cooperation, shared labor, and memory carried across time within the group. This matters because the nervous system does not simply respond to danger in the obvious sense. It also responds to social load. How many people are near, how predictable they are, how much attention must be divided among them, and how often the body must shift between trust, caution, indifference, and performance. In a small human group, those shifts still existed, but they occurred within a more bounded range. The body could learn the voices, movements, habits, and emotional rhythms of the people around it. Familiarity reduced certain forms of uncertainty, even when it did not remove hardship. Looking back toward the deep human past, before cities, mass institutions, large anonymous settlements, and modern communication systems, this narrower social world would have shaped the nervous system across countless generations. Early humans depended on one another intensely, but dependence within a small group is not the same as exposure to constant social density. A few close companions, kin networks, and recurring group members create one type of social atmosphere. Crowds, public noise, layered obligations, and continuous low-level comparison create another. The first kind asks the body to remain attuned to known individuals. The second often asks it to remain available to many signals at once, including signals with no clear emotional resolution. In modern life, a person may encounter more faces in a single day than an earlier human might have processed in weeks. Even when these encounters are brief, superficial, or indirect, they still register. The body must move through public spaces, schedules, institutions, traffic, messages, screens, and networks that generate a constant background of social information. Much of this information does not become meaningful relationship. It becomes noise, pressure, interruption, or silent comparison. The nervous system may not always distinguish sharply between deep social belonging and repeated social demand. Both ask for attention, but only one reliably returns grounding. This creates a subtle mismatch. Humans evolved as intensely social beings, yet the form of sociality that shaped the body was likely narrower, slower, and more repetitive than the one many people now inhabit. The body may therefore carry two truths at once. It may need other people deeply, and yet also become strained by the density and speed of modern social exposure. This is one reason solitude does not always heal, but constant contact does not always soothe. The problem is not simply too much or too little company. It may be the loss of an older social scale. In that older scale, the body had more chances to settle into recognition, to remain among familiar presences, to move through repeated relationships that did not constantly demand new interpretation. To say that humans lost something important may begin here as well. The body may be paying not only for physical separation from older environments, but for social environments that exceed the pace and scale under which the nervous system was first shaped. What has been lost is not society itself, because humans have always needed one another. What may have been lost is a form of social proportion, a human-sized field of belonging in which the nervous system could remain connected without being continually overrun by signals. The social world of earlier humans was not silent, but it was limited enough for the body to map it. That difference may be one of the most important. A small group does not remove emotional strain, yet it creates a field in which most signals come from known people, repeated roles, and relationships shaped over time by direct contact. The body can adapt to that kind of world because it is patterned. Familiar voices, recurring gestures, shared sleeping spaces, repeated tasks, and visible dependencies all give the nervous system a more stable framework for interpreting other humans. A person does not need to guess endlessly who belongs, who can be trusted, who may become important, or how to position the self within 1,000 shifting impressions. Even conflict inside such a world has boundaries. It happens among people who continue to exist within the same shared reality. This kind of social life may have been demanding, but it was often concrete. The body could place people in memory and place itself among them. For most of human history, that would have mattered deeply. Early humans lived through cooperation, observation, kinship, reciprocity, and shared risk in bands, camps, and settlements whose scale remained far below the social density of modern urban and institutional life. Even when groups connected with neighboring groups, daily social exposure was still shaped by repetition more than novelty. The nervous system was not constantly being asked to process large numbers of strangers, weak ties, abstract reputations, and distant events carrying emotional charge without direct consequence. Instead, social knowledge was grounded in presence. One knew others by seeing them work, rest, speak, age, grieve, recover, and move through the same material world. This groundedness may have reduced a specific kind of uncertainty, not the uncertainty of survival, but the uncertainty of endless social interpretation. In modern life, that interpretation can become nearly continuous. A person may move through streets, workplaces, screens, institutions, and networks that expose the mind and body to a far larger number of human signals than earlier environments would have produced. Many of these signals are partial. A face passes without context. A message arrives without tone. A status is displayed without intimacy. A crowd surrounds the body without relationship. The nervous system is asked to register all of this, yet very little of it becomes stable belonging. This may be one reason modern social life can feel crowded and thin at the same time. There is contact, but not always anchoring. There is information about people, but not always durable knowledge of them. The body remains socially engaged, but often without the slower repetition that allows social contact to become familiar enough to settle the system. Looking back toward the long beginning of human life helps clarify why this matters. Humans did not become human in a socially empty world. They became human in group life, but that group life was scaled to bodies, memory, and recurring presence. It was not infinitely expanding. It did not produce constant exposure to new audiences, remote judgments, or layered institutions that could touch the nervous system without offering reciprocal closeness. The modern problem, then, may not be that people are too social. It may be that the nervous system is receiving social quantity without enough social continuity. It is surrounded by impressions of human life, while being given fewer chances to fully settle inside known patterns of human closeness. This does not mean early groups were emotionally safer in every way. They could be harsh, restrictive, and fragile, but they were usually legible. The body could read them. It could learn who was near, who mattered, and how the day's social world was likely to unfold. That legibility may be part of what has been lost. The modern nervous system still longs for others, yet it often meets them through speed, fragmentation, distance, and comparison. It must remain alert to many social cues that do not resolve into real connection. Over time, this may create a form of background strain that is difficult to name because it does not always feel like fear or loneliness in a simple sense. It feels more like constant social weather, always present, rarely still. To say that humans lost something important may therefore mean that they lost not companionship, but proportion. The body may be paying for a world in which social life has expanded far beyond the scale at which familiarity, repetition, and presence once helped the nervous system feel at home. What may be most difficult for the modern nervous system is not simply the presence of many people, but the presence of many people without the depth, repetition, and legibility that once helped human social life become settling rather than exhausting. For most of human history, belonging was not abstract. It was built through direct contact across time. The same faces returned, the same voices shaped the day, the same bodies moved through work, rest, conflict, care, and silence together. This did not create perfect peace. Small groups could wound one another, and closeness could carry pressure as well as protection. Yet even under strain, the nervous system inhabited a field it could learn. It could recognize who was nearby, how they moved, how they sounded when calm or tense, how the group changed with season, illness, age, or loss. Social life had edges. It was not endless. The body did not need to remain available to an expanding stream of unfamiliar people, distant judgments, partial signals, and indirect comparison. It remained inside a human world that was socially demanding, but usually readable. That readability may have been one of the quiet conditions under which the nervous system first organized itself. Looking back toward the long, early arc of human life, this becomes more than a romantic image of community. Before large cities, bureaucratic systems, permanent crowds, and mediated social exposure, most people would have spent the majority of their days inside a limited field of recurring relationships. Even when neighboring groups met, traded, joined, or conflicted, daily life still returned to known presences. The body could settle into patterns of recognition. It did not need to repeatedly construct a social self for new audiences. It did not need to absorb endless information about lives it would never touch directly. It did not need to move constantly between belonging and exposure within the same hour. Modern life often asks exactly that. A person may wake into messages, pass through strangers, enter institutions, perform roles, respond to distant expectations, compare silently with people never met, and remain tethered to a flow of human signals long after the body has physically stopped moving. Much of this creates neither deep relationship nor true solitude. It creates suspended social attention. The nervous system stays open because something might matter, someone might need something, some signal might require response. Yet many of these signals never resolve into the old forms of shared presence that once gave social life its grounding weight. The result may be a state that is neither fully connected nor fully alone. This in-between condition may help explain why modern people can feel socially saturated and socially undernourished at the same time. The body is receiving more human input than ever, but not always in the forms that earlier human life would have recognized as stable belonging. The cost of this may not appear as one clear disorder. It may show itself as low-grade vigilance, difficulty settling after crowds, fatigue after light interaction, or the strange heaviness of having been socially engaged all day without feeling truly accompanied. None of this proves that earlier societies were emotionally easier, and it should not erase the suffering, exclusion, or fragility that small groups could contain. But it does suggest that the nervous system may have been shaped in a world where social life, however imperfect, was narrower and more embodied. It unfolded through repeated presence, not through constant exposure to signals detached from shared physical reality. To say that humans lost something important may therefore include the loss of social scale. Not the loss of other people, because humans have always depended on other people, but the loss of a human-sized social field in which attention, recognition, and belonging could remain proportionate to the body that had to carry them. When that proportion is broken, the nervous system does not simply enjoy a richer social life. It may also bear a heavier and more diffuse burden, one made not of obvious danger, but of endless partial contact. The body, shaped for closeness within limits, now lives amid contact without limits, and some of what it is paying for may be this quiet overload of human presence without the older steadiness of being known. For most of human history, time was not something the body had to obey in exact units. It did not arrive as a grid of numbered hours, alarms, appointments, and measured deadlines. It arrived through changes in light, temperature, hunger, fatigue, distance, and the repeated movements of other people through a shared environment. Morning was not a fixed point on a clock. It was the gradual return of visibility, the shift in air, the reawakening of sound, and the slow reassembly of activity after darkness. Evening was not an assigned hour for stopping. It was the fading of workable light, the cooling of the land, the changing use of fire, and the body's own response to the day's effort. This matters because the body was shaped in a world where time was sensed before it was counted. It learned to move through rhythms that were broad, environmental, and relational rather than exact. A person might know when certain tasks were usually done, when certain animals were more available, when a group tended to move, gather, rest, or sleep, but these were patterns, not precise schedules. The body did not need to synchronize itself to abstract units detached from immediate conditions. It synchronized itself to the living sequence of the world around it. Looking back toward the early human past, this would have been true across many different landscapes and ways of life. Whether people lived by foraging, seasonal movement, small-scale cultivation, or mixed subsistence, daily life still unfolded according to light, terrain, weather, food opportunity, and the collective needs of the group more than by exact measurement. There were certainly routines, and human communities have long had ways of marking cycles, seasons, and recurring events, but for most of the species' history, these forms of timing did not divide the day with the precision now taken for granted. The body could drift more naturally with changing conditions. It could extend work slightly if light allowed, stop earlier if weather changed, rest when the environment narrowed possibilities, and wake not only because a schedule required it, but because the world itself had shifted enough to call the body back into action. This older relationship with time may have helped preserve a closer alignment between internal states and external rhythms. Hunger, tiredness, warmth, darkness, and distance all contributed to the shape of the day. Modern life often reverses this relationship. Time is now divided, assigned, displayed, and enforced in ways that can override the slower signals of the body. A person may wake before the body has completed its natural movement through rest because an alarm demands it. A person may continue working long after fatigue has begun because the clock has not yet released them. Meals may happen because the schedule allows it, not because hunger has matured. Sleep may be delayed by obligation, extended light, or habit, even when the body is ready to descend. Under these conditions, the body is not simply living inside time, it is living under a form of time that has become more exact than the conditions in which the body first took shape. This does not mean precision is inherently harmful. Precise time has allowed large societies, coordination, planning, travel, and forms of stability that earlier humans did not possess. But something subtle may still be lost when time becomes less felt and more imposed. The body may continue to carry rhythms that expect broader transitions, more gradual shifts, and greater responsiveness to environment, even while daily life asks it to meet exact demands again and again. Over time, this can create a quiet tension. The body remains ancient in its pacing, while the world around it becomes increasingly exact. Looking back to the beginning of the human story helps keep this in proportion. Humans did not become human in a world of constant lateness, countdowns, deadlines, and scheduled fragments. They became human in a world where time moved through land, light, weather, fatigue, and social repetition. To say that humans lost something important may therefore include the loss of looser time, not as laziness or disorder, but as a biological atmosphere in which the body could move with the day rather than constantly being cut by it into fixed pieces. The precision of modern time changes more than planning. It changes the body's relationship to transition. In earlier human life, transitions were often gradual enough for the body to move with them. Light did not switch instantly from dark to bright. Warmth did not remain constant through the day and night. Hunger rose and fell within the possibilities of food, labor, and movement. A task might continue while conditions allowed, then end when the land, the weather, or the body itself made continuation less sensible. This did not create a world without structure. Human life always had recurring patterns, social expectations, and practical rhythms. But those rhythms were usually anchored in conditions that could still bend. The body therefore lived inside time as something unfolding, not merely as something assigned. It could feel morning arriving before fully entering it. It could feel evening gathering before sleep began. It could sense the slowing of a day through shadows, cooling air, shared quiet, and the diminishing usefulness of available light. This matters because the body does not only need duration, it also needs passages. It needs ways of moving from one state to another without being forced to leap instantly across them. For most of human history, those passages were supplied by the world itself. A person did not finish 1 hour under bright indoor conditions and then enter sleep a few moments later under artificial darkness, while the body was still carrying the speed and brightness of the previous activity. The day had more texture than that. It thinned, changed shape, and gently withdrew. Looking back toward early human life, this kind of temporal texture would have shaped daily existence in deep ways. People rose with varying degrees of light, not with a single sound that demanded action at the same minute every day, regardless of season or sleep depth. Work was often tied to what conditions permitted. Travel, gathering, tool use, preparation of food, movement between places, and social activity all unfolded within environmental limits. Even later agrarian life, though more scheduled in certain respects, remained closely tied to daylight, weather, and seasonal labor. Exact timekeeping came much later than the body. That sequence matters. The body's systems for alertness, rest, appetite, and effort were formed long before daily life became governed by minutes and fixed appointments. Modern life often interrupts these older passages. It divides time into precise segments and expects the body to fit itself into them whether or not internal states are ready. One may wake because the alarm has spoken, eat because the break is available, stop because the shift has ended, or remain active because obligations continue even after the body has started to slow. This creates a form of regularity, but it may also create friction. The body still moves through gradients of readiness and fatigue, yet the social world often asks for sharp transitions instead. It asks the body to be fully alert on command, to ignore the fading of energy until the schedule allows rest, and to compress activity, nourishment, and sleep into assigned windows. This does not always produce obvious breakdown. More often it creates a quieter strain in which the body is repeatedly pulled away from its own slower thresholds. Over time, this may help explain why so many experiences of modern fatigue feel less like simple tiredness and more like misalignment. The body is not only low on energy, it is often being moved through time in a manner unlike the one that shaped it. Looking back to the beginning of the human story keeps the point grounded. Humans learned to live in a world where time was thick with signals from land, sky, weather, and other bodies. Morning, effort, hunger, pause, evening, and sleep formed a sequence that was felt through atmosphere as much as through intention. To lose part of that is not merely to gain clocks. It is to lose a softer, temporal environment in which the body could prepare for change before the change was fully required. Something important may have faded when time became exact enough to organize societies, but too exact to always accommodate the organism living inside them. The body still waits for transitions that arrive slowly and clearly, even in a world that now prefers them to happen at once. What may have been lost when time became precise is not merely freedom from schedules, but a deeper bodily sense of sequence. The body was not formed in a world where each part of the day had to begin and end at exact points regardless of season, fatigue, weather, or the pace of surrounding life. For most of human history, time was carried by changes large enough to be felt. Dawn did not simply announce itself, it spread. Evening did not arrive as a command. It gathered through cooling air, lengthening shadow, quieting movement, and the reduced usefulness of the land for further work. Hunger often matured gradually within effort. Rest approached through accumulation, not through instruction alone. This meant that the body could move through the day with signals that overlapped and prepared one another. The shift towards sleep began before sleep. The return toward wakefulness began before full action. Even pauses in the day were not always separated sharply from labor, because work itself often contained slower and faster phases shaped by terrain, tools, weather, and the needs of other people nearby. In such a world, time did not merely divide life, it carried it. Looking back toward the earliest human settings makes this easier to understand. A body living close to open light and changing temperature did not need to be told with precision when the world was turning from one state to another. It could feel it directly. A person might still make plans, anticipate movement, and remember recurring patterns, but those patterns remain tied to lived conditions rather than detached measurement. This would have been true not only in foraging settings, but also across long stretches of early village life and seasonal labor, where the body still remained closer to daylight, land, and the natural expansion and contraction of tasks. Even when societies became more organized, the body continued for a very long time to live among transitions that were visible, audible, and tactile. Exact timekeeping arrived far later than the nervous system, the digestive system, or the rhythms of sleep and wake. That matters because the body still seems to expect a world where change can be sensed before it must be obeyed. Modern life often narrows that space. The day is cut into units that do not care whether the body has completed its descent into tiredness or its rise into alertness. A person may be asked to wake at the same hour in winter and summer, to eat inside brief available windows, to move quickly from bright stimulation into sleep, or to remain mentally active long after the body has begun asking for release. These demands can be managed, and many people manage them every day, but management is not the same as deep alignment. The body may comply while still carrying a quieter form of strain. That strain may not always appear as dramatic suffering. More often, it appears as a sense that rest begins too late, waking comes too early, hunger feels disconnected from the clock, or fatigue arrives in the wrong place relative to obligation. These are not always signs of illness. Sometimes they are signs that the body still belongs, in part, to a looser temporal world. The older human organism was not built around endless countdowns, fixed start times, repeated alarms, and the constant need to move instantly from one state into another. It was built in a world where the day had thicker edges. Morning opened, evening closed. Work rose and fell with conditions. Shared life followed recurring patterns without needing to become a sequence of exact appointments. To say that humans lost something important may therefore include the loss of temporal softness. Not softness as weakness, and not disorder, but the presence of transitions gentle enough for the body to enter them fully. When those transitions are removed, time still functions, society still coordinates, and life still moves. But the body may be asked to do more of the bridging alone. It must create calm before sleep in a world that stays bright too long. It must create alertness on command before dawn has fully reached it. It must create rhythm within structures that often cut across rhythm rather than support it. The cost of that loss may be one of the quietest in modern life. The body is still alive inside time, but time no longer arrives around it in the way it once did. It arrives more often as instruction, and less often as atmosphere. And somewhere inside that difference lies another part of what the body may still be paying for. The central tension in modern human life may be this. The environment changes far faster than the body does. Tools, buildings, clothing, transport, lighting, food systems, and social structures can transform within centuries, even within decades. But the body does not redesign itself at that speed. It carries forward systems shaped across immensely longer stretches of time. Systems built under conditions that were colder, less insulated, less predictable, more physically demanding, and more directly tied to the natural world. This does not mean the body is badly designed, nor that the modern world is unnatural in any simple sense. Humans created the modern world, and that too is part of human nature. But the pace of environmental transformation has greatly exceeded the pace at which the organism itself can be remodeled. As a result, the body often lives in surroundings that solve old problems while creating new forms of distance from the conditions that originally shaped it. This difference in pace is one of the quiet ideas running beneath the entire title. Humans may not have lost one single thing in one single moment, They may have entered a world that changed around them faster than the body could fully reorient to it. Looking back toward the deep history of the species makes this plain. For hundreds of thousands of years, and across even longer evolutionary routes before fully modern humans appeared, the body developed through repeated contact with variable light, uneven ground, shifting food access, low-level constant movement, small social groups, open exposure, and time sensed through the environment rather than managed with precision. None of these conditions were perfectly stable, yet their broad structure remained similar enough across long eras to shape the body in durable ways. Then, in a relatively brief span compared to evolutionary time, humans began living with built interiors, stored abundance, artificial light, padded surfaces, reduced exposure, precise schedules, dense settlements, and increasingly mediated forms of work and social life. Each of these changes brought real advantages. They reduced certain forms of danger, suffering, and uncertainty, but taken together, they also produced a world whose conditions differ sharply from those under which the body first became what it is. The result is not always obvious breakdown. More often it is misalignment. The body is still using old assumptions in a new environment. It still responds to light as if light carries time. It still responds to ground contact, movement variation, changing temperature, social scale, and irregular pauses in ways shaped by older patterns. Yet modern life often reduces, overrides, or reorganizes these signals before they can guide the organism as they once did. This does not mean the body is simply trapped in the past. Human beings are adaptable, and culture has always reshaped life. But adaptation through behavior, habit, and institutions can happen much faster than adaptation through biological change. That difference matters. It means that modern life can feel normal at the level of society, while still feeling strangely heavy at the level of the body. Looking again toward the early beginning of human life helps keep this from becoming abstract. The body did not emerge in a world of chairs, climate control, clocks, screens, roads, and continuous food visibility. It emerged in a world where effort, environment, and rest remain tightly braided together. When those braids are loosened, the body may not fail dramatically. Instead, it may send quieter signals: fatigue without obvious cause, tension without clear danger, restlessness without destination, discomfort without injury, difficulty settling even when surrounded by comfort. These signals should not be exaggerated into simple claims, and they should not be used to romanticize the past. Earlier human life was harsh in many ways, and modern changes have saved lives and reduced suffering. But it is still possible that the body pays a cost when the pace of the world outstrips the pace of its own formation. To say that humans lost something important may therefore mean that they lost continuity with the slower conditions that once shaped the organism across deep time. The body now lives inside environments built by intelligence, speed, and control, while still carrying tissues, rhythms, and expectations formed under a different tempo. That may be why so much of modern discomfort feels difficult to name. It is not always the result of one disease, one habit, or one event. Sometimes it is the quieter burden of being an ancient body in a world that has changed faster than ancient bodies can. The mismatch between the pace of the world and the pace of the body does not usually appear as a single, identifiable break. It appears as a series of small adjustments that never fully settle. The body continues to function, to adapt, to compensate, yet each compensation may move it slightly further from the conditions that once guided it with less effort. This is not because the body is resistant to change, but because biological systems tend to respond gradually through repeated exposure across generations, not through immediate redesign within a single lifetime. Modern environments, by contrast, can shift within years. Lighting extends the day, work structures compress time, surfaces remove variability, food becomes constantly available, and social exposure expands beyond physical presence. The body meets all of this with mechanisms that were shaped under slower and more repetitive conditions. It does not stop responding to light because light has become artificial. It does not stop responding to pressure because surfaces have become softer. It does not stop responding to timing because schedules have become precise. Instead, it continues to react, but often without the same clarity of signal it once relied on. This can create a form of continuous low-level adjustment, where the body is always trying to interpret a world that has become less aligned with its older references. Looking back toward early human life makes this difference easier to see. The body developed within environments that changed, but changed within boundaries that remained recognizable across long spans of time. Day followed night with reliable contrast. Seasons shifted with patterns that could be anticipated through experience. Food availability varied, but within ecological limits that repeated year after year. Social groups expanded and contracted, but usually remained within a scale that the body could map through familiarity. Movement remained part of daily existence, not something added later to compensate for stillness. In that context, adaptation did not require the body to constantly reinterpret its surroundings from one generation to the next. It required the body to remain flexible within a known range. Modern life expands that range in many directions at once. A person may live under artificial light long after sunset, eat foods from distant environments out of season, move very little for hours and then attempt concentrated activity, interact with many people without deep familiarity, and follow schedules that override internal signals. None of these changes are inherently harmful on their own, and many of them provide real benefits. But together, they create an environment that is less predictable in biological terms, even if it appears more controlled in practical terms. The body is therefore asked to navigate a world that is both more stable on the surface and more fragmented beneath it. It receives inputs that are steady in some ways and inconsistent in others, and it must respond without the guiding framework that older conditions provided. This does not lead to immediate collapse. The human organism is resilient. It finds ways to continue, to adjust, to create new habits and patterns. Yet resilience is not the same as full alignment. Over time, the accumulation of small mismatches may begin to appear as diffuse discomforts that are difficult to trace to a single cause. The body may feel tired without clear exertion, tense without clear threat, restless without clear direction. These are not universal experiences, and they should not be generalized too broadly, but they are common enough to suggest that something deeper than individual behavior may be involved. Looking again to the beginning of the human story helps ground this observation. Humans did not become human in a world that changed faster than their bodies could track. They became human in a world that changed slowly enough for the body to remain in conversation with it. To lose that pace is not to lose all connection. It is to make that connection more difficult to maintain. The body must now create coherence within conditions that do not always offer it directly. It must build its own bridges between signals that once arrived together. This is where the idea of cost becomes relevant. The body is not failing because it cannot keep up. It is working continuously to keep up with a world that moves beyond the tempo of its own formation. And in that continuous effort, something quiet may be expended, something that once came more easily when the world and the body moved at closer speeds. What follows from this mismatch is not a simple conclusion that modern life is wrong or that the past was better. The more careful truth is quieter. The body carries a history that is much older than the world it now inhabits, and that history still shapes how it reacts, even when circumstances have changed beyond recognition. A body formed across deep time under shifting light, uneven ground, fluctuating food access, low-level constant movement, close environmental contact, and smaller social worlds does not instantly become a different body because walls are stronger, nights are brighter, surfaces are softer, and schedules are tighter. It enters those conditions with the same tissues, the same regulatory systems, the same ancient expectations about how rest, hunger, contact, and timing are supposed to feel. That is why modern life can solve one level of hardship while still leaving the body strangely unsettled. The problem is not necessarily that the body prefers suffering. It is that the body was patterned through repeated contact with forms of variation that no longer surround it in the same way. When those forms of variation are removed, something more than discomfort disappears with them. A whole set of guiding references begins to weaken. The body may then continue in a world that is safer, cleaner, and more controlled, yet still feels subtly unmoored because the cues that once helped organize it are less available. Looking back toward the earliest human story helps make this easier to understand. Evolution did not prepare the body for a perfect environment. It prepared the body for a world full of recurring differences. The body learned through adjustment, not through total protection. It learned to settle against resistance, to move across the day in constant low effort, to read light and cooling air, to live with intermittent supply, to sleep in flexible rhythms, to know the world through the skin, and to belong within a social field that was limited enough to be learned deeply. These were not luxuries. They were ordinary conditions of human becoming. Once those conditions change faster than biological adaptation can follow, the body does not simply fall behind in an obvious way. Instead, it begins compensating. It manages longer stillness with structures shaped for more constant movement. It manages artificial time with systems tuned to broader environmental transitions. It manages controlled surfaces with tissues formed in conversation with the ground. It manages dense social exposure with a nervous system shaped in smaller circles of familiarity. None of these compensations are complete failures. In fact, they often work remarkably well. Humans continue to build, think, coordinate, and survive under conditions their ancestors never knew. But the need for constant compensation may itself be part of the cost. The body is not only living, it is continuously translating. It must interpret a fast world through slow biology. Over time, that translation may help explain why modern discomfort is so often diffuse. It is not always a single injury, a single deficiency, or a single mistake. Sometimes it is the accumulated effort of an old organism trying to remain coherent inside conditions that no longer resemble the ones that gave it its deepest assumptions. This does not mean the answer is to return to prehistory, which would be neither possible nor desirable. Earlier human life carried dangers, losses, and limits that no thoughtful person should romanticize. But it does suggest that understanding the body requires historical patience. The body is not a machine built for the present moment alone. It is a record of earlier worlds. To say that humans lost something important may therefore mean that the body once lived amid a denser weave of guiding conditions, and that modern life, for all its advantages, has thinned that weave. The result is a form of life in which many old burdens have been lifted, yet many old signals have also grown faint. The body continues forward inside this changed world, capable, adaptive, and often resilient, but not entirely at home in the speed of the transformation around it. That may be the deepest idea at the center of this question. Humans did not lose one thing. They lost continuity with a set of older conditions that once helped the body know how to be alive, and the body, still carrying their memory, is paying for that distance in ways that are subtle, scattered, and hard to name. Many of the body's signals do not arrive with a clear label. They come quietly, as a diffuse tiredness after a day that did not seem physically hard, as a difficulty settling into sleep despite apparent comfort, as a low restlessness in the limbs, as stiffness that appears without injury, as a sense of being both underused and overburdened at the same time. Modern life often encourages these signs to be interpreted in narrow ways, as isolated inconveniences, personal failures, or minor problems to be managed one by one. But the body does not always speak in isolated categories. Sometimes it speaks through patterns that only make sense when seen against a longer human history. A person may feel worn down without obvious danger, overstimulated without obvious crisis, or strangely uncomfortable inside a life designed for ease. These experiences are not proof of one single cause, and they should not be turned into dramatic claims. Yet they do suggest that the body may be reacting not only to immediate events, but to a wider mismatch between its older expectations and the conditions in which it now spends most of its time. This is why many modern symptoms can feel real without being easy to explain. They are not always signs of disease in a strict sense. Sometimes they are signs that the body is having to work harder than it appears, not to survive in the old way, but to maintain coherence inside an environment that no longer gives it the same guidance. Looking back toward the deep human past helps clarify this. The body was shaped in a world where light, temperature, ground contact, movement, food timing, sleep rhythm, and social scale all helped organize internal states from the outside. The organism did not have to generate all order from within itself. It was scaffolded by conditions in the environment. When evening cooled, the body received a cue. When movement filled the day, joints and muscles were distributed through varied use. When food came unevenly, appetite lived within fluctuation. When social life stayed within repeated circles, the nervous system could orient through familiarity. None of this made the past easy. but it did mean that many of the body's internal processes were once supported by a thicker web of external signals. In modern conditions, those signals are often weakened, delayed, or replaced by systems that are efficient for society but thinner in biological terms. The body is then asked to regulate more on its own inside settings that are stable on the surface yet strangely sparse in older forms of guidance. It must know when to sleep under light that remains bright, when to rest after long stillness rather than layered motion, when to stop eating in a world where food remains visible, when to settle socially amid constant exposure without stable belonging, when to feel time through clocks rather than atmosphere. This may be one reason modern discomfort is often so difficult to trace. It does not always arise from one wrong thing. It can arise from the cumulative effort of self-regulation in an environment that asks more of the body's internal control, while offering fewer of the natural cues that once helped carry part of that burden. The symptoms that emerge from this are often quiet, scattered, and unspectacular. They may look too ordinary to matter. Yet ordinary does not mean meaningless. A body that feels tired without hard labour, tense without immediate threat, or unsatisfied by rest despite material comfort, may be revealing something historically important. It may be revealing that safety and support are not the same as full alignment. The body can be protected from many older hardships and still remain somewhat out of rhythm with the way it was shaped to interpret the world. This does not mean that every ache, every bad night, or every restless day should be explained by deep history. That would be careless. Human discomfort has many causes, and honest thinking requires restraint, but it is still reasonable to ask whether the body's quieter symptoms sometimes reflect a broader story. Not a story of decline in a simple sense, and not a story in which the past becomes an ideal, but a story in which ancient biological expectations continue to meet modern conditions that do not always answer them clearly. To say that humans lost something important may therefore begin to sound less like a dramatic claim and more like a careful description. The body is not always crying out. Sometimes it is only signalling, in low and persistent ways, that the world around it no longer explains itself to the organism as fully as it once did. What makes these modern bodily signals so difficult to understand is that they often do not point cleanly to one source. The body may feel tired, but not in the way that follows honest physical exertion. It may feel tense, but not in response to one visible danger. It may resist sleep even in a quiet room, or wake from sleep without the sense of having been restored. It may become restless after too much stillness, yet not find relief in the kinds of brief movement modern life usually allows. These experiences are common enough to feel ordinary, yet their ordinariness can hide an important truth. The body is not always designed to express mismatch through sharp warning. Sometimes it expresses mismatch through vague persistence, a low stiffness that returns each day, a thin irritability, a feeling of being overfull with stimulation and undernourished in some less obvious way. These are not dramatic enough to demand a single explanation, but they may still reveal that the organism is working harder than it seems. This matters because human biology did not form in a world where most conditions were comfortable yet biologically diluted. It formed in a world where many conditions were harder, but also clearer. Light meant something. Cold meant something. Fatigue usually followed visible effort. Hunger usually belonged to time and circumstance. Social tension often had a face, a place, and a reason. The body's reactions were not always pleasant, but they were more often anchored to conditions it could read. In modern life, that anchoring is weaker. The body may be tired from fragmented attention rather than long movement, tense from accumulated low-level demands rather than a single urgent threat, or unable to settle because the day has offered too many signals without enough depth or sequence to organize them. Looking back toward the earlier human world helps explain why this kind of discomfort may feel so diffuse. The organism that became human was scaffolded by a thicker environment. Natural light helped shape alertness and rest. Uneven movement kept posture, joints, and circulation in broader use. Food timing created intervals the body knew how to cross. Social life, though imperfect, was often grounded in repeated presence. Time itself arrived through atmosphere and season rather than constant measurement. Under such conditions, the body did not need to interpret itself in isolation as often as it does now. It was held, in part, by the structure of the world around it. When those outer structures become thinner, smoother, or more abstract, the body must supply more of the organizing work from within. It must decide when to slow down in bright evenings, when to feel hunger in a world of constant food visibility, when to read safety in crowded but impersonal spaces, when to recover after a day of mental load but little full-bodied movement. This extra burden of interpretation may be one reason so many symptoms feel real while remaining difficult to name. The problem is not always that the body is malfunctioning in a medical sense. Sometimes the body is responding accurately to a world that no longer gives clear enough signals for ancient systems to operate with ease. That does not mean these symptoms should be romanticized, nor that all modern discomfort can be traced to human history. Many causes are possible, and serious suffering should never be reduced to a single broad theory. But within the quieter territory of everyday strain, a historical view can still be useful. It allows the body's low signals to be heard without exaggeration. A person who feels drained after a day of sitting, unsettled after a day of social contact, or strangely unrefreshed after a night that looked comfortable on paper may not be imagining a problem. The body may be revealing a pattern that is broader than one habit and older than one week. To say that humans lost something important does not require claiming that the past was healthier or more humane. It requires only the possibility that the body once lived inside a world that made more physiological sense to it than the modern world often does. The symptoms that emerge from that difference are easy to dismiss because they are scattered, mild, and familiar. Yet familiarity does not erase meaning. It may only mean that the mismatch has become ordinary enough to pass unnoticed. The body, however, continues to register it. Not always through crisis, but often through a quiet accumulation of signals that do not point to one broken part, only to a deeper absence that modern life rarely knows how to name. What gives these quiet symptoms their strange quality is that they often seem too small to belong to any serious problem, yet too persistent to be ignored. A person may wake feeling unfinished rather than fully restored. The body may feel heavy without having done heavy work. Muscles may carry a low resistance, as if they have been asked to hold something all day even when the day passed mostly in stillness. The mind may feel crowded while the body feels underused. None of these experiences point neatly to one injury, one deficiency, or one obvious cause. They live in the middle distance of modern life, familiar enough to be normalized, vague enough to be dismissed. Yet this very vagueness may be the clue. The body is not always built to express historical mismatch in dramatic forms. Sometimes it expresses mismatch through a lowered quality of ease. Rest no longer lands as deeply. Hunger no longer arrives with the same clarity. Fatigue no longer follows visible effort in a way that makes intuitive sense. Social exposure no longer results in clear belonging or clear solitude, only a lingering activation that does not fully settle. Stillness no longer feels like recovery, because it is layered on top of too much prior stillness. These are not separate complaints floating without connection. They may be different surfaces of the same deeper condition, a body trying to live coherently in a world that no longer provides the kinds of signals, pressures, and rhythms that once helped organize its basic states. Looking back across the long human story helps place these feelings in proportion. Earlier environments did not protect the body from hardship, but they often gave it clearer relationships between cause and effect. Effort usually had a physical object. Hunger usually followed time or scarcity. Tiredness usually followed exertion, light change, or environmental exposure. Social tension often came from known people in known settings. Rest happened against a background of real contrast between activity and recovery, light and dark, warmth and cooling, contact and distance. The body did not need to guess as often what state it was supposed to be in. The world around it helped explain that state. Modern life often weakens those explanations. Light continues long after nightfall. Food remains available long after appetite has lost shape. Social signals continue without full presence. Mental demand can remain high while the body barely moves. The clock can divide the day precisely, while the organism moves through it with much less clarity. Under such conditions, the body may not break down in any spectacular way. More often, it remains functional while sending quiet reports of friction. Those reports are easy to overlook because modern life teaches people to search for causes that are immediate, singular, and visible. But historical mismatch rarely works like that. It works through accumulation, a little less light contrast, a little less environmental contact, a little less ordinary movement, a little less silence, a little less social legibility, a little more control, a little more abstraction. None of these alone explains everything. Together, they may help explain why the body so often feels as though it is carrying more than modern comfort should require. This does not mean that the past should be romanticized or that every diffuse symptom has the same origin. Honest thinking requires restraint. Human discomfort can emerge from illness, aging, injury, loss, labor conditions, poverty, grief, and many other realities that no broad historical frame should erase. But within ordinary modern strain, it is still possible that the body's quieter symptoms are meaningful. They may not be errors in the body at all. They may be accurate responses to an environment that is materially advanced yet biologically thin in certain crucial ways. To say that humans lost something important may therefore arrive, at last, in a more careful form. What was lost may not have been one object, one habit, or one ancient virtue. It may have been a whole weave of guiding conditions that once helped the body know when to move, when to pause, when to sleep, when to eat, when to release tension, and when to trust that the world around it made sense. When that weave becomes thinner, the body does not always cry out. Sometimes it only becomes a little more tired, a little more restless, a little less settled by the very comforts meant to protect it. And in those small repeated signals, the body may be saying something very old. Not that it is broken, but that it still remembers a world that explained life to it more clearly. By this point, the question no longer seems to point toward one lost object, one broken habit, or one simple mistake in modern life. It begins to point towards something harder to hold in a single phrase. The body appears to have been formed within a thicker world, a world that did not merely surround it, but helped organize it. Ground gave resistance, light gave sequence, cooling air gave permission to slow down, irregular food gave rhythm to appetite, repeated movement gave continuity to posture and circulation. Familiar social circles gave the nervous system a scale it could inhabit without constantly recalculating itself. The skin remained in contact with textures, temperatures, and materials that reminded the body where it ended and where the world began. Time arrived as atmosphere. Before it arrived, as instruction. Sleep unfolded in response to conditions rather than under the expectation of perfect continuity. None of these conditions made life easy. They could expose the body to hardship, uncertainty, and danger. Yet taken together, they formed a kind of surrounding intelligence, not because the environment was designed for human comfort, but because the human body had been shaped inside it for so long. What may have been lost then is not simply roughness, or endurance, or some romantic closeness to nature. What may have been lost is a whole fabric of guidance, a web of external signals that once helped the body know how to move from one state to another without carrying so much of the burden alone. Looking back across the long human story, this possibility becomes harder to dismiss. For most of the species' existence, people did not need to manufacture every cue for living. The world itself provided many of them. Daylight shaped waking, darkness shaped slowing, weather shaped effort, distance shaped movement, scarcity and abundance shaped appetite, familiar others shaped social expectation, the ground shaped posture, shelter softened exposure but did not erase environmental contact. The body was never isolated from the conditions that were teaching it how to be alive. It did not have to guess as often what time it was in a biological sense, what degree of effort the day had asked of it, or whether the surrounding world was carrying it toward rest or toward action. Much of that guidance came from outside the body and entered it quietly, through repetition. Modern life has not removed all of this, but it has thinned it. Many signals that were once dense and unavoidable have become faint, delayed, filtered, or replaced by systems that are efficient for culture yet less legible to an organism built in older conditions. The body now lives with softer surfaces, more exact time, steadier temperatures, longer light exposure, constant food visibility, less ordinary movement, and wider but thinner social fields. These changes reduce many historical burdens, and that matters. It would be false to pretend otherwise. but they may also reduce the environmental texture that once helped the body settle into itself more easily. The result is not always illness, and it is not always dramatic suffering. Often it is a quieter uncertainty, as though the body still waits for forms of explanation the modern world no longer gives with the same clarity. This is why the title does not have to become a blunt conclusion. Humans may have lost something important, but that something may be less like an object and more like a condition in which the body was continuously oriented by the world around it, a condition in which the organism did not need to generate so much of its own coherence inside an environment that had grown abstract, controlled, and fast. The body still carries the older design. It still responds to pressure, light, timing, contact, rhythm, and social scale as if these things matter, because over deep time they did matter. Perhaps what is being paid for now is not the loss of hardship, but the loss of a world rich enough in natural guidance to make bodily life feel more legible from within. And if that is true, then the question changes shape. It is no longer only about what humans lost. It becomes a quieter question about what the body still remembers, even now, inside a world that has grown more comfortable, more powerful, and in certain hidden ways, harder for an ancient organism to fully understand. If something important was lost, it may not be possible to name it with one clean word because the body did not evolve through one clean condition. It evolved through layers. The body learned from resistance under the feet, from darkness that arrived gradually, from hunger that did not always end immediately, from the slow repetition of familiar people, from cooling air across the skin, from movement scattered quietly through the entire day, and from sleep that could deepen and loosen according to what the night allowed. None of these things acted alone. They overlapped and reinforced one another. Together, they created a world that was not easy, but was often intelligible to the organism living inside it. The body could read the world because the world kept giving readable signals. A change in light meant something. A change in temperature meant something. The nearness of others, the texture of the ground, the distance between meals, the gradual arrival of fatigue, all of these belong to one continuous field of experience. That continuity may be part of what has been thinned. Modern life has not merely changed one habit, it has separated many signals that once arrived together. Light can remain bright while the body is already moving toward night. Food can remain visible while appetite has lost clear shape. Social contact can continue without familiarity. Rest can occur on soft surfaces after long hours of bodily stillness rather than after a day of varied movement. Time can be measured exactly, while the organism inside it feels increasingly unsure of when the day has truly begun to open or close. In such a world, the body does not necessarily lose its ancient responses. It keeps them. But those responses may no longer meet the same kind of environment that once made them coherent. This may be why so much modern discomfort feels vague rather than decisive. The body still responds to cues of light, pressure, rhythm, and contact. Yet the cues themselves are now weaker, mixed, delayed, or rearranged. It is not simply that the body lives differently. It is that the body must assemble from fragments what earlier human life often delivered as a whole. Looking back toward the long beginning of human life helps make this point more solid. Early humans did not have to invent a full artificial framework for when to sleep, when to eat, when to move, when to slow down, and how to orient themselves socially from one moment to the next. Much of that framework was carried by the conditions around them. The world itself participated in regulation. Not perfectly, and not kindly, but continuously. When the body became tired, the evening often supported that tiredness. When the group gathered, the social field was usually narrow enough to be known. When hunger rose, it rose within a broader ecology of waiting and effort. When the body rested, it rested inside direct contact with surfaces, air, sounds, and changing temperatures that kept it linked to place. These conditions did not remove hardship. They gave shape. And shape may be what the modern body is often missing. Not comfort, because comfort is abundant in many places. Not survival, because survival has improved in many ways. Shape in the deeper sense, a world whose signals arrive clearly enough to help the body organize itself without so much private labor. This is why the question at the center of the title cannot be answered by pointing to one lost custom or one lost object. The loss may be structural. Humans may have lost a more coherent relationship between organism and environment, a relationship in which daily life explained itself to the body through repeated patterns that were hard to miss. Now the body often has to create rhythm where rhythm is weak, create transitions where transitions are abrupt, create calm where stimulation lingers, and create orientation inside spaces that are controlled yet strangely thin in biological meaning. That may be one of the deepest prices the body is paying. Not simply that life has changed, but that many of the older signals that once helped it feel where it was, what time it was, what effort meant, and when it was safe to let go have become too faint to carry the organism as fully as they once did. Perhaps the deepest loss was never a single thing that could be held in the hand or named in one sentence. It may have been a relationship, so old and so continuous that the body once depended on it without ever needing to notice it. For most of human history, the body lived inside a world that did not leave it alone with itself. The world pressed in gently and constantly. Light told the body when the day was opening and when it was beginning to close. Ground told it how weight was distributed and where tension remained. Air told it when warmth was leaving. Hunger told it not only that food was needed, but that time had passed and energy had been spent. Familiar faces told the nervous system where it belonged. Movement linked 1 hour to the next, so that stillness meant something when it finally arrived. Sleep came not as an isolated task, but as the last phase of a long sequence the environment had already been preparing. None of this made life safe in the modern sense. None of it guaranteed comfort, health, or peace. Early human life was often harsh, exposed, and uncertain, but the body was not moving through that world without guidance. It was being shaped by a dense fabric of signals that helped it understand what state it was in and what state was coming next. That may be why modern life can feel so strange at the level of the body, even when it is efficient at the level of society. The modern world protects, softens, stabilizes, and extends. It solves many old dangers. Yet in solving them, it often separates the body from the very conditions that once gave its rhythms clarity. Light remains after night has begun. Food remains near, even when hunger has not matured. Surfaces reduce pressure before the body can fully read it. Time arrives as instruction rather than atmosphere. Social life expands without always deepening. The day fills with mental demand while the body remains mechanically quiet. Under these conditions, the body is not broken, it is translating. It is trying to make sense of a world that is materially generous in many ways, but biologically thinner in some of the oldest ways that matter. This may be why so many forms of modern discomfort are modest, scattered, and hard to name. The body still carries a memory of continuity. It still seems to expect that effort, fatigue, light, temperature, contact, appetite, and rest will belong to one coherent pattern. When they do not, the body often does not protest with undramatic symptom. It simply becomes a little harder to settle, a little easier to tire, a little less restored by comfort alone. To recognize this is not to romanticize the past. No honest telling of human history should do that. The past contains suffering that should never be turned into a false ideal. But there is still something valuable in seeing the body historically, rather than treating it as though it were designed for the present moment alone. The body is older than modern life. It is carrying the record of worlds that no longer fully exist, and it is still trying to live intelligently inside a world that changes faster than those records can fade. Perhaps the most useful lesson is not that people should return to some imagined earlier way of living, but that the body deserves to be read with patience. Its needs are often quieter and older than the systems built around it. Its signals are not always errors. Sometimes they are reminders that human beings were formed in relation, not isolation. Relation to land, to light, to movement, to intervals, to repeated others, to change that arrived gradually enough to be felt. If the body is paying for anything now, it may be paying for the thinning of that relationship. And if there is educational value in this long question, it may be this gentle caution. Progress can make life longer, cleaner, and safer, but it does not automatically make the body feel at home. The body may still be asking, in its quiet way, for a world that explains itself more clearly. And if it is still asking that, what would it mean to listen without pretending we already know the final answer?